Don't be fooled by images of this young man with a visibly beaten face. The reality is, he has caused a real tragedy. James Lloyd Allen was born in Providence, Rhode Island, USA, on August 29, 1954. He was one of 3 children born to Lloyd James Allen and Jacqueline Allen, with siblings named Danny and John. The Allens were a typical middle-class family, closely knit and active members of St. Thomas Church. The only out-of-the-ordinary aspect was Lloyd's job. He was a police captain in Providence. As a child, Allen admired his father and the idea of doing things right, though he still found time for some mischief during his school years. Allen is remembered by his family and friends for secretly listening to his favorite baseball team, the Boston Red Sox, on a radio earpiece during class, hoping the nuns wouldn't notice. Growing up with strong values of service, he eventually followed in his father's professional footsteps. His faith also remained a crucial part of his life. By the late 1970s, during weekly prayer meetings at St. Thomas Church, Allen's attention was drawn to a woman named Marge, who was from Bristol and 4 years his senior. Despite the daily demands of his police work, Allen was too shy to approach her. However, fate intervened when Marge was robbed and contacted the police. It turned out her home was in the area Allen patrolled. When responding to the call and finally meeting her, he found himself in a comfortable role. After taking her statement, he made several follow-up visits which led to dating. They married in 1988 at St. Thomas Church. She was 38 and he was 34. Allen and Marge had different personalities, but they shared the same core values and a deep love for each other. This love was the foundation of their wonderful family. They had 2 daughters, Jennifer and Caitlin. Allen wasn't the handiest person around the house, but he was a dedicated dad who adored his daughters more than anything. To support his family, he also worked a second job as a security guard at a supermarket on the east side of the city, which allowed Marge to stay home and take care of their daughters. Their marriage was mostly peaceful. They enjoyed staying in to watch TV or play with their daughters rather than going out. The only real disagreement at home was about baseball, since Marge was a big Yankees fan and she passed that passion on to her daughters. So, whenever they watched games together, there was a bit of a friendly rivalry. As the girls grew up, Marge started working at St. Thomas School. James, on the other hand, was all in on his job in public service, truly embodying what it meant to be an excellent police officer. His co-workers and friends saw him as a man of integrity, with a lot of compassion for crime victims and a knack for solving crimes. His amazing memory and observational skills, along with his resilience and courage, were what made him stand out. He always went the extra mile and was ready to answer calls even in the middle of the night. By 2005, he had become one of the most seasoned detectives in the department, honored with numerous medals, including the Departmental Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart. Known for his signature trench coat, rain or shine, James brought laughter and comfort to Marge and their friends. Meanwhile, Esteban Carpio lived nearby and seemed to be on the wrong side of the law. Born in Boston, Massachusetts on July 30, 1978, to an unknown father, Esteban was raised by his mother, a third-grade teacher. There isn't much known about his early years. As an adult, he worked as a barber and had a history of legal troubles related to substance possession. In the early 2000s, he started a relationship with Samaine Finn. They later had a daughter together. Esteban's behavior started to change for the worse in late 2004. He began acting oddly, claiming to hear voices and believing that a friend had cursed him or used voodoo on him. Whether true or not, his girlfriend took him to a Buddhist temple for help, where a monk tried to protect him by tying a rope around his waist. But it didn't help, and his condition didn't improve, so his mother called for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctors linked his issues to stress and substance abuse, but it's unclear if any steps were taken to address his substance use. The following year, with no improvement in his condition, his mother, Yvonne Carpio, took him back to the hospital. That spring, Esteban crossed paths with Madeline Gata, an 84-year-old active woman who loved her craft of sewing. She had worked as an interior decorator and had created custom designs for various clients. She was also a proud grandmother to 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. On April 16, 2005, after finishing work early in the afternoon, Detective James grabbed a quick bite at a favorite spot before heading home. Meanwhile, Esteban, who was driving nearby, spotted Madeline. Seeing her as an easy target, he quickly got out of his car with a knife. He tried to steal her purse but ended up hurting her with the knife. Her screams alerted people nearby, and one quick-thinking neighbor noted Esteban's car license plate as he ran away. Madeline was taken to a health center where she managed to report what happened. Around 7 in the evening, James's phone rang at home, and he promptly answered. The call was about the attack on the elderly woman and the suspect's clear description, prompting the detective to spring into action. The police team, including James, arrived at Esteban's residence the next day. According to statements from Esteban's family, they warned the officers that Esteban was experiencing a mental crisis, having trouble sleeping, and was not in his right mind. Minutes later, he was taken to the Providence police station for questioning. Once there, he was led to a conference room on the 3rd floor and, as he was not under arrest, his handcuffs were removed. Detective James, assisted by another detective, began the interrogation. James was armed, as per regulation. Initially, Esteban provided a false name, denied any previous arrests, and claimed innocence. When Detective James warned him that he knew his real identity and was aware of his criminal record, Esteban became agitated and asked the other detective for some water. After the other detective left the room, Esteban managed to seize James's gun under unclear circumstances and lock the door from the inside. Timothy, the other detective, later recounted hearing Detective James screaming for help, saying Esteban was going to kill him. Shots were heard, and when they finally broke down the door, they found James dying from 2 fatal wounds, one to the chest and another to the forehead. Esteban had attacked the detective with his own gun and escaped by shooting out a window in an adjoining room, falling onto the grass below. A chaotic scene ensued outside the police headquarters as local, state, and federal officers launched a relentless citywide manhunt for the suspect. Meanwhile, James was rushed to Providence Hospital, but despite all medical efforts, he was declared deceased. Esteban was apprehended after an hour-long search, following a violent confrontation with a taxi driver. His capture was not easy. He was combative and violent. The police officers struck him 3 times in the face. From there, the officers took him to Rhode Island Hospital, where he was administered sedatives and later interviewed. The exchange was captured on a recording that clearly showcased Esteban's distressed voice. At the same time, the doorbell rang at the Allen home. While their daughter slept, Marge went downstairs to find 3 officers at the door. She invited them in, and they delivered the tragic news inside. Marge, stunned, asked where it had happened. Learning it was at the police station, she couldn't believe it. Of all places, that should have been the safest for a police officer. From that moment, her mind struggled to function normally, and the pain hit her hard. The officers called friends of the Allens to stay with the girls and then escorted Marge to the hospital in a patrol car, as only a direct relative could claim the body. She later recounted how the hospital corridors were filled with police officers, all nodding respectfully as she passed. They led her to the trauma room. Her husband lay on the table. The wounds were lethal, yet not visible. On Monday, April 18, 2005, at 10 a.m., a second interview took place at police headquarters. A hysterical Esteban was interrogated again. During the interview, Esteban often rambled, insisting he was insane and unloved. This exchange was also recorded. Meanwhile, the police chief and James's colleagues gathered at the Providence District Court, awaiting Esteban's arraignment. Beyond showing solidarity and affection for their fallen comrade, they wanted to see the man capable of such actions. The tension in the room was palpable as all eyes turned to Esteban, who walked with difficulty, his hands and feet shackled. Several officers escorted him. He had bruises and cuts on his face and wore a white mask covering from his chin to his eyes, making him resemble Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. The moans and screams of his mother and girlfriend soon followed. His mother immediately accused the police of beating her son. Officials struggled to remove both women from the courtroom as they continued to cry out about cover-ups and police brutality. Esteban's face was bleeding and sweating. His eyes were swollen, and his cheeks, forehead, and skull area were severely bruised. His face was marred with multiple bruises and scars. However, such a mask, known as a spit shield, is used by law enforcement when a suspect is injured or combative. Due to Esteban's previous state, the officers decided to take maximum precautions and placed a spit shield on him. They explained that he had injured a leg, an arm, and his head when he jumped out of the window. When accused of murder, he responded by nodding, not denying the crime committed. He only spoke to tell his mother he loved her as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Subsequently, Esteban was detained without bail. Given that the victim was an on-duty police officer, the charge carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As is common in such cases that shock the public, a press conference led by the police chief was necessary. However, many questions remained unanswered as he did not explain how Esteban managed to seize the officer's gun or the details leading up to the sequence of gunshots. He also did not discuss weapon-carrying protocols within police facilities or associated interrogation procedures, nor did he mention if there were any witnesses. Instead, he expressed heartfelt words for Detective James. James was posthumously promoted to the rank of Detective Sergeant. On April 21, 2005, a sea of police officers and officials accompanied the procession preceding his funeral service. Although it could have been held at the downtown cathedral, Marge chose differently, faithful to the story that had always connected them to St. Thomas Church. The funeral service was held there. After the religious ceremony, James was taken on a 4-mile final journey to St. Anne's Cemetery by a horse-drawn carriage. Marge was moved to see thousands of people, including police officers from across the country, lining the route. Beyond the crime and ensuing mourning, the case of the detective brought to the forefront a long-standing concern: the security in government buildings. Unfortunately, it wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred. For some time, visitors to the Providence Police Building had to pass through a metal detector. What no one had anticipated was that an individual would disarm an officer of his service weapon. In this context, Michael Brady, a police procedures expert and professor at the University in Newport, Rhode Island, mentioned that it was not unusual for a detective to interrogate a suspect while armed. Thus, James was not doing anything different from what police officers do daily across the country. However, the controversy over alleged police abuse against Esteban dominated headlines and online news portals. Later, an investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) concluded that there was no excessive force by the Providence police, who were compelled to subdue the man due to his violent behavior. It was a special agent from the FBI who presented the report to the press, adding that if the subject resisted the police officers, they were fully justified in using whatever force necessary to subdue him. Despite these claims, Esteban's family continued to insist on the accusations against law enforcement and highlighted Esteban's mental disorder.
It's police brutality. He was mentally ill and he needed help and we couldn't get it. We tried and tried. And he didn't deserve this.
And in fact, his defense team centered their strategy around his mental disturbance. During the trial preparations, Esteban was evaluated by several mental health experts. The defense enlisted a psychiatrist and forensic neuropsychologist. After reviewing Esteban's medical records from hospital visits prior to the incident and listening to tapes of post-arrest interviews, these specialists concluded that the accused suffered from schizophrenic psychosis and an acute onset of paranoid psychosis. The state's evaluation was conducted by neuropsychologist and Professor David Faust and forensic psychiatrist and psychiatry professor Martin Kelly. Insanity defenses are used in a small fraction of U.S. criminal cases and are rarely successful. According to experts in psychiatry and law, jurors might be skeptical that mental illness absolves someone from a crime or fear that a not guilty verdict could ultimately release a dangerous individual back into society. Esteban was charged with assaulting Madeline, the 84-year-old woman, with a knife, as well as the murder of James. The trial began in June 2006. In his opening statement to the jury, the defense attorney acknowledged that the evidence of his client committing the actions was overwhelming. However, the key question for him was whether Esteban was too disturbed to be held fully accountable. One of the first witnesses was a police officer who admitted during his testimony that Esteban had been beaten during the arrest. On June 19th, the accused's mother and his 24-year-old girlfriend testified about Esteban's alarming behavior prior to the incidents. Following their testimonies, two doctors took the stand. Both specialists argued that the accused lacked the capacity to commit the crime due to the severe effects of schizophrenia, and thus should not be held fully responsible. The next day, the state countered by presenting Professor David and forensic psychiatrist Martin. Professor David testified that he had examined the results of psychological tests administered to the accused while he awaited trial at the Adult Correctional Institute and concluded that the administration of the test and subsequent results were questionable and that Esteban's responses indicated feigning and malingering. Forensic psychiatrist Martin then testified that, at the time of the crimes, Esteban did not suffer from any mental disease or defect that would have prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions or conforming his conduct to the requirements of the law. In summary, they described him as manipulative, with a pronounced criminal and antisocial profile. After about 9 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense and delivered their verdict, finding Esteban guilty of first-degree murder of Detective James. He was also found guilty of firing a weapon during a violent crime that resulted in death and of assaulting Madeline with a dangerous weapon. Meanwhile, the cries of Esteban's family members filled the gallery. The court offered to consider a new trial motion after the July 4th holiday, but Esteban's defense attorney emailed the court on July 5, 2006, indicating that no such motion would be filed. The sentencing hearing took place on October 6, 2006. In his first public statement since the trial began, Esteban told the court that his life and health were fine until something happened one day that he could not control. Then, in tears, he apologized to the Allen family for what had occurred.
Every day, I face the facts of what I did and what happened.
The judge then sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, one without the possibility of parole for the crime against James, and an additional consecutive 20-year sentence for the aggravated assault on Madeline. The judge harshly addressed the defendant, stating that the court had no doubt he was incorrigible. Thus, allowing even the possibility of parole was antithetical in a civilized society. The Attorney General released a statement hours later, praising the judgment as a gesture to honor the memory of one of the best officers of the Providence Police Department. Subsequently, the Rhode Island Supreme Court upheld the convictions and denied the defense's request to reduce the life sentence without parole. As for Madeline, she recovered without complications. Since James's burial, Marge made it a habit to visit her husband's grave about 4 times a year. She always smiled, remembering that James rested near a cemetery path. After all, watching who passed by was part of his job. She consistently left floral arrangements that included a white rose, with no particular reason for choosing that color, but it became a tradition for the detective's widow. In 2015, on the 10th anniversary of her husband's death, Marge found the courage to consider her first interview. She acknowledged that, for the first 9 years, a physical pain in her chest prevented her from speaking. However, she eventually overcame the pain. During that interview with a reporter, she felt free to criticize the negative press often directed at law enforcement officers. Marge knew firsthand that police work is challenging and involves making difficult decisions. Once she broke her silence, she also addressed the numerous accusations of racism associated with her husband's case. When asked if speaking out would help her find closure, she disagreed with the term, stating there is no closure, just time that always flies by, gradually healing the wounds. That night, Lise Coleman needed a babysitter to look after her 10-month-old son, Travis. Christine Falling, who had experience in babysitting, offered to take care of the baby at her house. The next morning, the little boy was found dead without any evident signs of aggression or violence. However, the police investigation revealed a much darker truth than anyone could have imagined. On March 12, 1963, Christine Falling was born in Perry, Florida, USA. She was the second daughter of a couple who would be considered very unusual today. Her mother, Anne, was a minor, only 16 years old when she had Christine. The eldest daughter, Carol, was born more than a year earlier when Anne was just 14 or 15 years old. To this already dramatic picture was added the significant age difference with Thomas, her father, who was 65 years old. Throughout history, there have been a few uncommon relationships where a large age difference does not matter, and the marriage is very happy. However, this was not the case with Anne and Thomas. A few months after Christine was born, her mother left the house, leaving her and her sister Carol in the care of their father, who worked as a lumberjack and had little to no parenting skills. However, the young mother did not run away forever. She returned home sometime later and was pregnant again. She had more kids over the next 2 years, naming them Michael and Earl. Although the home had 2 girls and 2 boys, Thomas, the husband, claimed that only one of the 4 children was his. It was evident that the family's conditions were neither normal nor stable. The arguments between the mismatched couple grew increasingly frequent, sometimes turning violent. During periods when Anne disappeared, Thomas would take the 4 children to the forest while he worked. The situation was dire for everyone, especially the children. Adding to their difficulties, Thomas suffered a work-related accident that rendered him unable to continue working. One day, Anne made an extreme decision. She took her 4 children, put them in the car, drove to a shopping center, sat them on a bench, and left, never to return. It is not difficult to imagine that the 4 children ended up in the social care system, circulating through orphanages and related institutions. No further information is found about the 2 younger brothers, Michael and Earl. The eldest daughter, Carol, seemed to be a normal child, or at least no contrary references are found. But Christine was a different story. Living in adverse conditions since birth, Christine developed mental problems, intellectual deficits, and exhibited aggressive behavior. Caregivers at the orphanage described her as a compulsive liar and thief, someone who broke rules to get attention. Her relationships with other children and people, in general, were terrible. Everything became more complicated when she began to gain weight uncontrollably and suffer from epilepsy. It is easy to imagine that in an orphanage environment, Christine endured more suffering, becoming the target of mockery, comments, and cruel treatment. However, sometime later, both Christine and Carol had a stroke of luck. They were adopted by a couple, the Fallings, who not only gave them their last name, but also a stable home. The Fallings were a couple who longed to have children, but Dolly Falling couldn't get pregnant. Some accounts suggest that the husband knew the girl's family, which is why they decided to adopt both of them. Unfortunately, although their environment changed, Christine's behavior did not. She was problematic. Her vocabulary and way of speaking were not consistent with her age. She had fits of rage, and she continued a habit she had started in the orphanage, tormenting cats in unimaginable ways. Sometimes she would throw them from great heights to see if it was true that they had 9 lives. She quickly discovered it was false but continued her experiments. Another factor that added tension to the situation was Christine's epilepsy. Life in the Falling household began to turn into a nightmare, not just for the seemingly generous couple, but especially for the adopted girls. According to some sources, the father abused both girls, particularly the older one. This was something the couple always denied, though there are records of 2 arrests of the father for abusing Carol. The first case went to trial, but the jury was divided. The second time, the accusation was made by his own wife Dolly, who later withdrew it. Things were so out of control that the pastor of their church intervened and managed to convince the family to remove the girls from their home. Thus, the sisters were sent to a home in Orlando, where a large group of children, aged between 6 and 21, lived after being removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Apparently, this place was more pleasant for Christine, but it did not stop her impulsive, deceitful, aggressive, and cruel behavior, nor her epileptic seizures. After some time, frustrated by their inability to achieve the desired behavior from the sisters, particularly Christine, the authorities decided to remove both girls from the institution. Consequently, they were sent back to the Fallings. From this point on, the intimate abuse seemingly stopped, but the physical violence did not. The final straw was a severe beating the father gave Christine for being 10 minutes late coming home. To make matters worse, the next day, he insisted that she go to school in shorts so everyone could see the marks of his justice. She was not only mistreated but also humiliated. Carol, the eldest, who was approaching 15 years old, decided to find a job to establish her independence. Christine, just over 12 years old, supported her. The day after the beating, both girls ran away from the Falling home. With their newfound independence, their world changed, and not for the better. Initially, both sisters went to a friend's house of Carol's. Christine stayed there for a month and a half, but then decided to look for her biological mother in northern Florida. She managed to find her and lived with her for a while. Nearly 2 years later, in 1977, at the age of 14, Christine fell in love with a 20-year-old young man whose name I couldn't confirm, but it was said he was her stepbrother. Shortly after, they got married, but the sudden marriage lasted only 6 weeks, marked by arguments and violent fights. Christine ended up in the hospital twice for injuries sustained during these fights. In one incident, she even threw a heavy outdoor object weighing over 20 pounds at her husband while he slept. The hasty marriage ended even more abruptly. Following this new disaster in her life, Christine, who by then weighed around 200 pounds, began to exhibit new behavior. Over the next 2 years, she visited the emergency room more than 50 times with a long series of strange and varied ailments that doctors couldn't diagnose. She always seemed very nervous, listing symptoms that didn't correspond to any known diseases. In other instances, potential diagnoses were ruled out with medical tests. One time, Christine went to the emergency room claiming a servant had bitten her, but this was proven false. On another occasion, she arrived at the hospital with bleeding from her intimate areas, which turned out to be just her menstruation. Eventually, the doctors reached a possible diagnosis in her case: Munchausen syndrome, a mental disorder in which a person pretends to be ill, creates symptoms, and even inflicts injuries on themselves to attract medical attention, and consequently, the interest of others due to their supposed poor health. Despite all her strange behaviors, significant weight, obvious mental problems, lack of social skills, and unkempt appearance, Christine had a reputation for loving children and being responsible and trustworthy. This led her to earn some money by babysitting for friends and neighbors. At first, everything seemed fine. Her services were appreciated, and as a result, her occasional jobs became more frequent. Things seemed to be finally going well for her. Then came February 25, 1980. On that day, 17-year-old Christine was hired to look after a little girl named Cassidy Johnson. The child was just 2 years old and at a very playful stage of her growth. Her loved ones called her Poncacito and enjoyed her antics. The girl's parents went out to work, collecting worms to sell as fishing bait. But that day, something went terribly wrong. 5 hours after being left alone with Cassidy Johnson, Christine was calling emergency services. She said the little girl had fainted and fallen from her crib. An ambulance was quickly dispatched to take the child to Tallahassee Hospital. The doctors did everything they could to revive Cassidy Johnson, but without success. One of the doctors noticed a strange bump on the child's head. Christine explained that she had lost consciousness and fallen from her crib. Cassidy Johnson was diagnosed with brain inflammation, possibly caused by an infection. Sadly, after being hospitalized for 2 days, she passed away. The Johnsons, the girl's parents, were utterly devastated, and Christine was also deeply saddened. All accounts agree that at least one of the doctors involved in Cassidy Johnson's case had doubts about the cause of the problem. In fact, he suggested that the police be notified of the possibility that there was more to the girl's death than an accident or brain inflammation. At this point in the story, accounts of what happened vary. Some sources claim that the doctor who wanted to notify the authorities was ignored by his colleagues, while others say the police were notified but did not act. It was also said that the doctor wrote a note for the police, but it never reached its destination. Finally, other reports claim that the police did indeed summon the young babysitter. The officers questioned her but found nothing to justify her detention or to warrant a more extensive investigation. What is certain is that the case was never thoroughly investigated, although the autopsy clearly showed that the head injury played a significant role in Cassidy Johnson's death. After the 2-year-old's death, Christine, apparently devastated, decided to move to another city and ended up relocating to Lakeland, Florida. There, she slowly began to work as a babysitter again, demonstrating the same efficiency she had shown in her initial jobs. A year had passed since the death of Cassidy Johnson, and by then, Christine was 18 years old. Some distant relatives asked her to take care of their 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis. Once again, tragedy struck when the boy suddenly stopped breathing for no apparent reason. Christine called emergency services and Jeffrey's parents, but there was nothing they could do. The boy arrived at the hospital already deceased. In this case, as the cause of death was unknown, an autopsy was performed. The doctors concluded that Jeffrey had died from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that reduces the heart's ability to pump blood. A virus can cause myocarditis, an adverse reaction to medication, or a general inflammatory condition, which can sometimes lead to sudden death. With this result, no one suspected the babysitter. The parents accepted the doctor's diagnosis of their son's sudden death. Once again, the young caretaker appeared devastated, and this time it wasn't just any death, it was a family member. Just 3 days after Jeffrey's unexpected death, Christine was asked to take care of another child, Joseph Spring, for a few hours. Joseph, a 2-year-old cousin of Jeffrey, needed care while his parents attended Jeffrey's funeral. Incredibly, the tragedy repeated itself. A few hours after leaving Joseph with Christine, the child was dead. Christine claimed she had left the boy sleeping and then heard a scream. When she ran to see what had happened, she found Joseph dead. The health professionals who examined Joseph's body concluded that both Jeffrey and Joseph had died from the same cause, myocarditis caused by an infection. Although no one had concrete evidence or real arguments, rumors began to circulate in the town about the string of coincidences surrounding Christine's babysitting jobs. Even Christine herself started saying that a curse seemed to follow her, bringing death to the children she cared for. The babysitter appeared deeply affected, and everyone knew she had some mental disabilities, but no one really believed she was capable of murdering the children. Consequently, as suddenly as they started, the rumors began to die down. Voices of consolation emerged for young Christine, telling her to calm down and that it was all a series of unfortunate events. Christine gained even more sympathy when she was hospitalized with a viral infection in her digestive system. But this brought a new question. Had she infected the children she was caring for with a virus that proved fatal for them? But very soon, Christine was cleared of the initial suspicions when the doctors found no connection between the virus she had contracted and the one that caused the children's myocarditis. The general conclusion was that bad luck was solely responsible for the deaths. Consequently, Christine was seen almost as a victim. Besides being physically unattractive and mentally underdeveloped, she seemed to be followed by misfortune. Those who knew Christine defended her passionately. They couldn't conceive that she could be responsible for the children's deaths or even capable of harming a child in any way. Additionally, at that time, infant mortality was relatively common in impoverished areas of the cities. After these harsh experiences, Christine decided to move back to her hometown of Perry. On her own initiative, she decided to stop caring for young children. With that decision made, she took the necessary steps to get certified and registered to care for the elderly. Soon, she began working for William Swindle, a 77-year-old man diagnosed with terminal cancer. William lived alone and needed someone to help with household tasks, shopping, cooking, organizing the house, assisting with his needs, and keeping him company. However, the new caregiver didn't even get the chance to prove she could care for the elderly, because on her first day, William passed away. As in so many previous instances, Christine called emergency services, who found the man unconscious on the kitchen floor. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was declared dead upon arrival. Although no autopsy was apparently performed, the cause of death was listed as a massive heart attack. A week later, in the midst of a hot summer, Christine decided to go out with her stepsister Betty Jean Daniels, who was 19 years old. It was July 14th, 1981. Christine accompanied Betty to a vaccination center so that Betty's baby, Jennifer Daniels, could receive her immunizations. On the way home, Betty stopped at a store to buy some diapers and left Christine in the car with the 8-month-old baby. When she returned with her purchases, Christine told her that it seemed the baby had suddenly stopped breathing. Initially, the mother was not alarmed. She said that sometimes babies breathe so softly that it's barely noticeable. But when she checked Jennifer, she realized the baby was indeed not breathing, and her skin had a bluish tint. The distressed mother immediately drove to the nearest emergency room, where the baby was declared dead. It was thought to be a case of sudden infant death syndrome, or a rare reaction to the vaccines received. At this point in the story, part of Christine's life goes unaccounted for. There is a period of about a year during which there is no information about her activities. The next reference takes us to July 2nd, 1982, when Liz Coleman asked Christine to babysit her 10-week-old son, Travis Coleman. It should be noted that other sources claim the baby was 10 months old. Apparently, Travis had been very sick with pneumonia but had recovered. Since he was now perfectly healthy, his parents wanted to go out that night to celebrate the end of that stressful chapter. At that time, Christine was living with her boyfriend, Robert Johnson, in a trailer. She told Mrs. Coleman to bring the baby to her trailer and pick him up the next morning, assuring her she would gladly take care of him for the night. Sadly, as you might imagine, when Liz arrived the next morning to pick up Travis, the baby was dead. Christine appeared shocked and claimed that the last time she saw him alive was at 3 a.m. when she changed his diaper and gave him his prescribed medicine. She said that, at that moment, the baby was fine and soon fell asleep again. Authorities were called, and an autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of death. Initially, it was thought to be a new respiratory problem or a relapse of the pneumonia he had suffered. However, during the post-mortem examination, specialists found internal injuries consistent with mechanical asphyxiation. Meanwhile, Christine was interviewed by a local news outlet about Travis's death. She stated that she had experienced the deaths of 5 children, and although she didn't know what was happening, it was enough to scare her. Travis was Christine's last victim. The medical personnel notified the police that the baby's death was intentional. The police immediately arrested Christine, who soon became known as the babysitter killer. Christine was subjected to police interrogations and evaluated by psychiatric specialists. It wasn't long before the 19-year-old confessed. Christine claimed she heard voices in her head telling her, "Kill the baby, kill the baby," which wouldn't stop until she did it. She also gave some personal reasons for committing the murders. Her account was both sad and chilling. Referring to her first victim, Cassidy Johnson, Christine said they had been playing outside, and the girl was very agitated. When it was 8 o'clock and the child wouldn't calm down, she suffocated her until she stopped breathing and turned purple. Her heart had stopped, her pulse was gone, and she wasn't breathing. Christine tried to resuscitate her but couldn't. Regarding the case of Jennifer, Christine explained that the little girl was constantly crying, which drove her crazy. So she put her hands around her neck and squeezed until she stopped. About what happened with Travis, Christine said the baby was sleeping and she just smothered him for no reason. She continued to give gruesome details, telling authorities that she copied the method from something she saw on television, but added her own touches. She described it as an easy and simple method. After adding that she killed them without knowing why, she explained that she would place a blanket over their mouth and nose and press until they stopped moving, ensuring no one could hear them scream. When she learned she could be sentenced to death in the electric chair, Christine pleaded guilty to the 3 described murders. She claimed she had nothing to do with the others. Authorities were confident that the other 3 victims were also killed by her, but by then, it would have been very difficult to prove, so they decided to leave it at that. In late 1982, Christine Falling was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. 3 years after entering prison, Christine also confessed to the murder of William Swindle, the 77-year-old patient who lived only a few hours after being placed in her care. In prison and over the years, specialists have stated that Christine did not actually hear voices in her head. Behind bars, she returned to her old habit of claiming to suffer from numerous and strange illnesses, frequently visiting the doctor. Officially, Munchausen syndrome was never diagnosed, but when she had her first opportunity to apply for parole in 2007, a mental health specialist said he believed she indeed suffered from the syndrome and consequently posed a danger to the public. No one came forward to speak on Christine's behalf, and her early release was denied. She had another opportunity before the parole board in 2017, but again, her request was denied. According to one source, her case could be reviewed again in 2024, while Christine continues serving her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Before concluding, it's worth noting that besides the children mentioned in this case, there were reportedly 3 others whom Christine may have also tried to kill, but fortunately, she did not succeed. Leading the list is a 3-year-old named Kylie Summerling, who became seriously ill while in Christine's care. The child was diagnosed with meningitis, but thankfully survived. The other 2 were brothers Charles and Jeffrey Hale, aged 3 years and 14 months respectively. Both also became seriously ill while under Christine's care and required hospitalization, though the details were not specified. The Hale brothers were lucky and recovered from their illnesses. Today, working parents who must leave their children in the care of babysitters have tools to monitor what happens in their homes while they're away. Security cameras and even apps that allow real-time viewing of what happens at home are measures available to protect children from potential abuse by caregivers. However, things were very different in the 1980s. In the book Murder in America, someone once asked Christine what she would like to do if granted freedom, and she said she would love to return to babysitting because she claimed to love children to death. On the afternoon of April 23, 2006, a tragic scene was uncovered in a quiet home. Mark Richardson, age 42, and his wife Deborah, age 48, were found deceased in their basement. Upstairs, their 8-year-old son, Tyler Jacob, was also found lifeless. Alarmingly, the couple's 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was not found at the scene, sparking immediate fears for her safety. However, as the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that the circumstances were far more sinister than anyone initially suspected. Today's story is set in Medicine Hat, a small city about 200 miles southeast of Calgary, known as Canada's sunniest spot. It's a lively town favored by young, outdoorsy families, offering plenty of natural beauty and activities. The Richardson family enjoyed all the perks of life here. Deborah and Mark Richardson, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, represented a typical family unit. Deborah and Mark originally met in 1990 at a gym in Ontario where they both attended classes, including one for substance abuse recovery. They had conquered their past addictions by the time they met, and after moving to Medicine Hat, they started their family with Jasmine, followed by Tyler 4 years later. Their life in Medicine Hat was peaceful. Their home was modest, and both children were thriving and healthy. Jasmine, especially, was doing well in school and was known as an honor student at just 11 years old. She was cheerful, pretty, and had a contagious smile, much like her mother. However, as Jasmine entered her teenage years, her personality began to shift, a common scenario for many teens. Although she started this phase as a happy, church-going student, her demeanor changed dramatically when she discovered the internet. While she continued to be bubbly and friendly in person, online she adopted a completely different persona. Jasmine became active on social media platforms like MySpace, where her profile gradually shifted from light and girly to a darker, gothic theme. She also joined Vampire Freaks, a site aimed at connecting those interested in goth, punk, and emo subcultures. Her profile showcased her in thick eyeliner, alternative clothes, and posing with prop guns. Jasmine's social media profiles were a clear window into her teenage interests. Piercings, tattoos, Tim Burton movies, toy guns, and loud music were all the rage among emo teens in the mid-2000s. She used a made-up name and claimed she was 15. She liked talking to older people, trying to seem as mature as they were. Her parents did their best to help her through these tough changes by suggesting they spend more time together and find activities they could all enjoy. But Jasmine wasn't interested. She saw her younger brother Tyler as a bother and hardly spoke to him anymore. Jasmine could spend hours at her computer, chatting with people she'd never met in person. Her parents, Deborah and Mark, believed this was just a phase. They thought she would eventually grow out of it and become more sensible. So they were pretty lenient about her new interests. She regularly attended local music shows that catered to the younger crowd. Jasmine, only 12, would typically go to these events with a group of her friends. However, it was at one of these punk rock concerts that things began to take a troubling turn. At this show, Jasmine met a 23-year-old named Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was a troubled individual. He had dropped out of high school after enduring severe bullying and had since refused to seek employment. Instead, he lived in a trailer park with his mother, who struggled with alcoholism and had unstable relationships, leading to a revolving door of men in their home. These men were often abusive towards Jeremy, adding to his difficult circumstances. Jeremy had a tough life, often facing physical abuse from his mother's boyfriends. At 23 years old in 2006, he was without a job and spent most of his time chatting online with much younger girls. Jeremy saw himself as a bit of an oddball, a view that his friends agreed with, especially when he shared some strange facts about himself. For instance, Jeremy claimed to enjoy the taste of blood and said he drank it regularly. He even carried a vial of blood around his neck for whenever he felt the urge to indulge in this unusual craving. Jeremy also had a peculiar claim that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. This strange assertion left many skeptical, especially because Medicine Hat had seen many full moons without any incidents, leading some to dismiss his claim as nonsense. Jasmine first encountered Jeremy at a local punk rock concert where she falsely told him she was 15, though she was really just 12 years old. Despite the age difference, this did not seem to bother Jeremy, who had a preference for younger girls because he found them easier to influence and control. They started exchanging messages across various social media platforms. As the months passed, Jeremy and Jasmine's conversations became more frequent and intense. Jeremy's alternative lifestyle and interests began to shape Jasmine, pushing their chats into a disturbingly romantic direction. Influenced by Jeremy, Jasmine started to embrace a darker, gothic lifestyle. Jeremy's declaration of love was extreme. He gave Jasmine a vial of his own blood, similar to one he wore. This relationship soon became known to Jasmine's parents, who were understandably shocked and worried upon discovering her involvement with an older man. They promptly grounded her and confiscated her computer to cut off communication. To help Jasmine break away from what they saw as a harmful relationship, they decided to seek the help of a psychologist. They truly believed that counseling would repair and strengthen their bond with their daughter. To their relief, it seemed to work. Jasmine appeared to be cooperating and moving back towards a more normal life. She promised her past behaviors were behind her, and so her parents gave her computer back. This decision, however, would tragically lead to their undoing. But did Jasmine cut ties with Jeremy? Not at all. They soon reconnected, this time more secretive than before. Jeremy was infuriated by her parents' interference, expressing his anger through dark, aggressive poetry. He even fantasized about dramatic and violent actions against her parents, echoing a disturbingly romantic notion of eliminating obstacles to their relationship. Jasmine, perhaps influenced by Jeremy's intense emotions, also expressed extreme sentiments in her messages, joking about drastic actions against her own parents to be with Jeremy. While it's common for teenagers to express frustration with their parents, the context here was far more serious, given Jeremy's manipulative nature and his influence over Jasmine. This situation was not just teenage melodrama. It was being shaped by Jeremy's dark fantasies, blurring the line between jest and potential reality. The Richardson family continued their daily lives, seemingly content. Mark and Deborah were relieved to see their daughter Jasmine showing signs of improvement, and their son Tyler was enjoying his carefree childhood as a cheerful 8-year-old. Unknown to them, a sinister plan was being formed behind a computer screen, with Jasmine involved in plotting against her own family. Jasmine often complained to her friends about how much her parents annoyed her, expressing a desire to end their lives, but nobody took her seriously. On the night of Saturday, April 22, 2006, as Mrs. Richardson was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise in the basement and thought it might be rats. She went downstairs to check, flipped on the light, and to her shock, saw a person in a ski mask standing there. She screamed in fright, and the masked person rushed at her, trying to silence her. Despite his efforts, Deborah fought back, screaming even louder. The attacker then stabbed her repeatedly with a knife. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a screwdriver he had left out from fixing an outlet earlier that day, and ran to the basement. He arrived to find his wife in a pool of blood and confronted the attacker, only to be stabbed in the stomach and then multiple times more. As he lay dying, Mark asked, "Why?" The attacker coldly responded, "Because your daughter wished it." Upstairs, their young son Tyler was left alone, sitting on his bed in his pajamas, too scared to move as he heard the footsteps approaching his room. The door then slowly opened. The next day, on a calm Sunday, April 23, 2006, the neighborhood was quiet, with families engaged in their usual weekend activities. It was a typical Sunday with children playing outside, including a boy who decided to visit his friend Tyler. However, when he knocked on the door of the Richardsons' home, no one answered, even though their car was parked in the driveway. Puzzled, the boy peeked through a basement window and was startled to see a motionless figure on the floor. Alarmed, he rushed home to inform his mother, who promptly called the police. The police arrived to find the door unlocked and the house disturbingly quiet. Their investigation began in the basement, where they discovered the lifeless bodies of Deborah and Mark Richardson in a gruesome scene, surrounded by pools of their own blood. Deborah had been stabbed 12 times in the chest, and Mark had suffered 24 wounds to his chest and back. The tragedy extended further as the police found Tyler's body in his bedroom, surrounded by blood-soaked toys, with multiple stab wounds and his throat cut. As the officers surveyed the scene, family photos hinted at a missing member, Jasmine. Initially, it seemed like a brutal home invasion, possibly involving Jasmine's abduction. An Amber Alert was issued for the missing girl as police started to investigate, beginning with her school and friends. A shocking discovery came when they accessed Jasmine's school locker. Among her belongings, they found a disturbing stick figure drawing depicting a family walk that ends in horror. The sketch showed one family member retrieving gasoline from a truck, dousing the others and setting them on fire. This grim drawing suggested a very different narrative from an abduction, hinting at Jasmine's involvement in the tragedy. When authorities found the chilling drawing in Jasmine's locker, they began to view her disappearance with suspicion, suspecting that she might be involved in her family's murder. Prompted by Jasmine's friends who revealed Jeremy's affection for Jasmine and disturbing remarks about harming her parents, police quickly started looking also for Jeremy. These leads, coupled with a slew of digital evidence from messages, emails, and chat logs, helped investigators piece together a grim motive. Soon, the story of the suspected killer couple was making headlines, shocking and horrifying the Medicine Hat community. Detectives turned to the media to help find Jasmine, hoping she would make contact or that someone would provide information that could lead to her. Due to her age, Canadian law prohibited the media from publishing Jasmine's real name, so news agencies started referring to her simply as JR. However, police uncovered that a few hours after the crime, Jasmine and Jeremy were seen at a restaurant and later at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Witnesses at the party noted that Jasmine seemed normal, showing no signs of abduction or shock. She was seen drinking and enjoying herself. When questioned by friends about how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed and remarked, "Jeremy and I just took care of them," to which Jeremy added, "I carved them up like fish." The party guests thought this was a dark joke, not realizing the truth in their words. Their infamy led to their downfall. Within 24 hours of the murders, they were spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, about 100 miles from Medicine Hat. Police found them sleeping in a pickup truck and arrested them without resistance. Despite their arrest, Jasmine and Jeremy seemed indifferent, showing more annoyance than remorse. During interrogation, their apparent unity crumbled. Jeremy confessed that Jasmine had implored him to eliminate her parents, promising to do anything for her. In turn, Jasmine pinned the blame solely on Jeremy, claiming her previous talks of killing her family were just jokes and she never intended any real harm. However, Jeremy's version aligned more convincingly with the extensive digital evidence, suggesting that both had actively participated in the planning and execution of the crime. The burning question was, what exactly was their plan? On the night of April 22nd, Jasmine stealthily let Jeremy into her house. She then went upstairs as Jeremy headed to the basement. There, he confronted Deborah and brutally attacked her with a folding knife. The noise woke Mark, who rushed to help his wife, only to find himself in a deadly struggle. Mark dashed towards the basement upon hearing a disturbance, only to discover his wife on the floor with a masked man looming over her. A struggle ensued as Mark attempted to wrestle the knife away from the intruder, but tragically, he was overpowered and sustained multiple stab wounds to his chest and back. As he lay fading, he managed to ask the assailant why, to which the chilling reply was, "Because your daughter wanted it that way." Mark succumbed to his injuries shortly thereafter. While this grim scene unfolded downstairs, Jasmine was upstairs, supposedly tasked with killing her younger brother Tyler, who was peacefully asleep. The accounts of what happened next vary significantly between Jasmine and Jeremy. Jeremy asserted that Jasmine had acted alone in killing Tyler. Jasmine, on the other hand, claimed she initially hesitated, and it was Jeremy who urged her to go through with it. She admitted to stabbing Tyler, albeit reluctantly, which she described as weakly. However, evidence showed that Tyler had been stabbed 5 times, including a severe laceration to his throat. After the murders, Jeremy left the scene, leaving Jasmine alone in the house with the bodies of her family. She then took a taxi to Jeremy's trailer, escaping the horrific scene she had left behind. During the trial, a taxi driver testified about picking up Jasmine shortly after the murders. Remarkably, she appeared calm and greeted him cheerfully, showing no signs of distress despite the recent loss of her entire family. After being picked up, Jasmine reunited with Jeremy, and the two spent the next 24 hours together, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of their actions. They were observed being affectionate in public, even visiting friends and boastfully discussing what they had done. Their lack of remorse extended even after their arrest. Interestingly, authorities allowed them to exchange letters, possibly hoping to gather more evidence from their communications. In these letters, Jeremy proposed to Jasmine, and she accepted, further demonstrating their disconnect from the severity of their situation and the normal responses expected under such circumstances. After Jasmine claimed that Jeremy was solely responsible for the murders, the pair faced their trials a year later, in June 2007. Jeremy, being an adult, was subjected to the full extent of the law. His defense painted him as a psychologically weak individual with low self-esteem, blaming his violent actions on a history of abuse from his mother's lovers and a desperate craving for affection. They argued that he sought Jasmine's love to fill the emotional void from his troubled childhood, a sentiment echoed by his friends who said he would do anything for her affection. Nonetheless, such explanations did not excuse the heinous nature of his crimes, and Jeremy was sentenced to 3 life terms, with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Jasmine, referred to as JR in court due to her age, was also found guilty of murdering her family. The digital evidence and her behavior before and after the murders painted a clear picture of her involvement. Her lack of remorse was striking, especially when she was observed smiling while recounting the events of her family's deaths during her testimony. However, because she was a minor at the time of the crimes, the harshest sentence she could receive under Canadian law was 10 years, which included psychiatric care and monitored living in a community setting, rather than traditional incarceration. This lighter sentence reflects the complexities of dealing with young offenders, even those involved in grave crimes. During her incarceration, Jasmine was often cited as a model of successful rehabilitation. Through therapy and severing ties with Jeremy, she began to show genuine remorse for her actions, convincing the authorities responsible for her rehabilitation that she was unlikely to reoffend. The person in charge of her expressed hope for her transformation, suggesting that her family, had they survived, might have been proud of her progress. He reminded her that while the past cannot be changed, she has control over her daily actions and behavior. In the last 5 years of her sentence, Jasmine studied under a new identity to help her reintegrate into society. She was released in 2016 and has since lived anonymously among the public. Meanwhile, Jeremy remains incarcerated, a situation many deem appropriate, considering his predatory behavior prior to the murders. The debate over Jasmine's sentencing remains contentious. Some argue that if someone is old enough to commit a crime, they should face the full consequences, while others believe that Jasmine, who was only 12 at the time and manipulated by an older man, deserved a chance for rehabilitation. After maintaining a clean record for 5 years following her release, Jasmine's criminal record was expunged, allowing her a fresh start without the burden of her past crimes. Mark and Deborah Richardson are remembered as caring parents. The complexity of Jasmine's case raises difficult questions about justice, punishment, and rehabilitation, especially considering her age and the influence exerted by an older individual. While 10 years may seem short given the severity of the crime, the circumstances of her age and manipulation add layers of complexity to the discussion of her case. Canada's judicial approach often emphasizes rehabilitation over strict punishment, which sets it apart from places like the U.S., where the focus might lean more towards punitive measures. This philosophy raises complex questions, especially in cases like Jasmine's. Despite being only 12 years old when she committed her crimes, the severity of her actions, killing her entire family, is undeniable. This leads to a significant debate. Can someone who has committed such grave acts be fully reformed and trusted once released?
Skylar came out and I tried to hold her and she's breathing, she doesn't have a heartbeat.
So now, what do you do when you realize that she's not going to make it?
I have to bury her. I couldn't tell anybody.
Kim and Scott Richardson had a happy marriage, and their love and commitment brought their firstborn Skylar into the world on March 9, 1999. Later, they welcomed Jackson. Both children grew up in a peaceful environment. Weekends were family bonding times at home. Neighbors often saw them in their backyard, where Kim and Scott would grill food and work in the garden. Skylar and Jackson enjoyed playing with the family dogs, their laughter filling the air. Family celebrations, including birthdays, holidays, and graduations, took place around bonfires in the yard, which had witnessed countless joyful moments. It was a refuge of peace. No one could have imagined that in this backyard, amidst the Richardson family's happiness, an unutterable secret was buried. As Skylar grew older, weight and diet, issues that sometimes hide behind a seemingly perfect facade, played a central role in her life. These concerns became her obsession, leading to unexpected and painful situations. For Kim, the impact of these issues was undeniable. Her worry began in Skylar's early adolescence when her daughter already showed signs of eating disorders. At 12 years old, Skylar was obsessed with calories, refusing to buy gum because it added 5 calories to her diet. She attended high school in Ohio, excelling as a cheerleader. Being a cheerleader required her to be small and agile, traits she had, making her a perfect flyer. This role involved performing aerial stunts and holding complex poses for a few seconds before returning to the ground. However, the pressure to stay thin marked the beginning of Skylar's struggle with her weight. Her obsession with not gaining even a gram led to dangerous behaviors like induced vomiting, but when the cheerleading season ended, Skylar would binge eat. She then subjected herself to severe fasting periods. Discussing her weight was a taboo topic in the family, and Skylar's extremely reserved nature made addressing the issue difficult. The Richardsons sought professional help, including doctors, therapists, and nutritionists, but no intervention seemed to ease her suffering. Skylar was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, a disorder characterized by an obsession with perceived physical flaws. Amid her dissatisfaction with herself, she became increasingly reserved and kept numerous secrets, deeply worrying her parents. However, from the outside, everything seemed perfect at home. Skylar was seen as a beautiful and popular young woman during her high school years, excelling as a cheerleader and radiating vitality and joy in her school community. Her younger brother Jackson was on the football team at the same school, which contributed to the Richardson family's reputation as exemplary. In late July 2016, just before her senior year of high school, Skylar started a relationship with a friend's cousin, but it ended quickly. However, in January 2017, she found a new love, Brandon, a junior at her school. Skylar seemed happy and even appeared to be gaining weight, which gave her family hope. This change suggested that Skylar had her eating disorder under control. Her choice of a form-fitting dress for prom and her healthy appearance increased her parents' confidence in her well-being. In March, Skylar even went on a family vacation, wearing a two-piece bikini showing some curves. Skylar and Brandon's relationship seemed to be going well, and her mother's concerns led her to address a sensitive topic: pregnancy. Kim wanted Skylar to take measures to protect herself, so she took her to the gynecologist in April. At this point, Skylar was 18 years old, so she went into the exam room alone. What should have been a routine visit for a contraceptive prescription turned traumatic for Skylar. Her tears as she left the office indicated something troubling, but Kim assumed it was due to it being her first visit, which can be emotional and somewhat invasive for a reserved girl like her daughter. Little did her mother know that the cause of her tears was a shocking revelation. The doctor informed Skylar that she was pregnant, and not just newly pregnant. She was already 8 months along. Skylar desperately asked the doctor to keep this secret as her parents couldn't know. 9 days after the gynecologist visit on May 5, 2017, Skylar attended prom with Brandon. Despite being in her advanced pregnancy, her form-fitting dress fit her surprisingly well. It's worth noting that she had tried on the same dress in February, and it fit the same 3 months later. Apparently, she hadn't gained any weight in those 90 days, which is highly unusual for someone so far along in pregnancy. Perhaps that's why no one noticed the secret that was about to change her life forever. Less than 48 hours after attending prom, nature took its course, and it was time for the baby to be born. In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar gave birth to a small baby girl in the bathroom of the Richardson home. The newborn, apparently lifeless, became a dark secret that Skylar feared her parents would discover. In a panic, she decided to bury the baby in the backyard of their home. No one knew about this incident. In the weeks that followed, Skylar continued her life, outwardly acting as if nothing had happened. She didn't tell anyone about the tragic event that haunted her. In July 2017, she visited her gynecologist again and asked for a contraceptive prescription. As expected, the doctor asked what had happened with her pregnancy. She replied that her baby had been stillborn and that she had buried the body in the backyard of her family's home. Unbeknownst to her, revealing this secret set justice in motion, the police received a concerning call from a doctor who reported that after a gynecology and obstetrics consultation, a patient had given birth at home and buried the baby in the backyard. This call triggered a series of events that shook the Richardson family to its core. Kim and Scott were taken aback when the police arrived at their door on July 14, 2017. It was a sunny summer day, and Skylar was at her grandmother's pool, enjoying happy moments with her boyfriend and cousins. She had no idea they were coming for her. The family was entirely unaware of the gravity of the situation when the police contacted them. According to Scott's later statements, the police assured them that they only wanted to talk to Skylar about something she might have witnessed and insisted she was not in any trouble. Trusting those words, Scott took his daughter to the police station without proper legal representation, an action he would later consider one of the biggest mistakes of his life. On that same July 14th, when Scott accompanied his daughter to the police station, he had no idea that she had been hiding such a dark secret. At the station, the officers asked him to wait outside since Skylar was an adult. Inside an interrogation room, a police officer read Skylar her rights and began pressuring her to reveal what had happened with her baby.
So just kind of help me, walk through this. So what did you do? I guess, is your bedroom upstairs or bathroom upstairs? Okay, so you had to walk downstairs?
I had to clean myself up a little.
Are you carrying her?
Yes.
Did you go into the garage, or do you have an outdoor shed where you have a shovel?
I have my garage.
The family was about to face a crisis that would impact their lives in unimaginable ways. In the small interrogation room, Skylar finally shared the truth with the investigators.
Please, just be honest, what's going to happen?
I don't know, okay? I'm in here observing.
Jail?
No. You're not going to jail.
No, and I'm not going to.
Just relax, okay? Listen, just relax, okay?
I don't want to go to jail.
I know you don't. Just relax,
I don't have to go to jail, though, right?
Listen, I understand that you're sorry, and I understand that you're upset, and I understand that you didn't want this to happen, okay? Just take some deep breaths, okay? Things will be okay.
I don't have to go to jail.
You're not going to jail.
In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar faced the unimaginable alone in her bathroom.
She gave birth to a baby who showed no signs of life. She held the newborn for hours, hoping for a miracle that never came. Resigned to the heartbreaking reality and ensuring not to wake her family, she quietly buried her daughter in a makeshift grave in their backyard using a small garden trowel. During a tense interrogation that followed, the investigator eventually disclosed to Skylar's parents, Scott and Kim, the grave reason for their daughter's questioning. Shocked by the news and unable to comprehend how they had missed the signs of her pregnancy, they listened as Skylar shared the baby's name, Annabelle, and revealed the brief relationship with the father, a cousin of a friend from the previous summer. This revelation devastated her mother, Kim, who later expressed her anguish over the pain Skylar had endured alone. As the family absorbed this new reality, investigators were already moving towards their home to dig deeper into the case, unbeknownst to them. The small town quickly buzzed with the news as police activity spiked in an area unaccustomed to such attention, drawing national media to the story of the troubled young cheerleader. That same day, authorities exhumed the remains of baby Annabelle for forensic examination. After enduring over 5 hours of grueling questions at the station, Skylar and her parents were allowed to go home. However, the respite was short-lived. 6 days later, the investigators returned with unsettling news from the autopsy. There were signs of charring on Annabelle's bones, suggesting she had been burned, which led them to suspect homicidal violence. On July 20th, 2017, during a second intense interview without her legal or parental support, Skylar was directly accused by police of killing and burning her baby. Throughout the interview, she steadfastly refuted the allegations, denying any use of heat or fire 17 times, and insisting 29 times that Annabelle was stillborn, maintaining her innocence against the grave charges laid before her.
Did you hear any crying after? Or did you hear any little crying? Okay.
Under the intense pressure of the interrogation, Skylar eventually changed her story, admitting that she might have partially burned the baby's body. When asked if the baby had made any noises at birth, she hesitantly mentioned that there might have been a sound. After an hour of intense questioning, the detectives decided they had enough to arrest her and charged her with reckless homicide, suspecting the baby had suffocated. Skylar was released on bail, but this was just the beginning of her legal battles. The prosecutor publicly laid out the charges: aggravated murder, which could lead to a life sentence, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and abuse of a corpse. He argued that Skylar's actions were driven by her family's desire to maintain a perfect facade. Despite these heavy accusations, Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, remained determined to clear her name with the help of their lawyers. Scott voiced his frustration over how the police had misled them from the beginning, telling them Skylar wasn't in trouble, only to detain her and search their home for evidence once they brought her to the station. Kim described the ordeal as a nightmare, noting how Skylar's arrest reignited her struggles with eating disorders and psychological stress. The legal drama attracted intense media scrutiny and public speculation, resulting in a gag order, although by then the Richardsons were already facing widespread criticism and hostility. Online and outside their home, the family endured harsh criticism, protests, and threats, feeling under constant surveillance and harassed by people who distorted their images online. Amid this turmoil, they hired experienced defense attorneys who contended that Skylar's confession was coerced. The case took a twist when the pathologist who initially reported charring on the baby's remains withdrew her statement, confirming there was no evidence of burning. Despite this new evidence, the prosecutor stood firm on the charges, insisting on the validity of Skylar's initial admissions during the interrogation. However, the defense succeeded in getting Skylar placed under house arrest. At home, surrounded by books and her dogs, she tried to find some peace under a pine tree where her parents had placed an angel ornament at the burial site of her baby, whom she called Angel. In a reflective interview, Scott explained that from Skylar's perspective, she was handling the sudden and tragic event the best she could, believing the baby was still born. He detailed how she tenderly placed the baby in the ground and marked the spot with a flower. As time passed, her dreams of attending the University of Cincinnati had to be put on hold. The uncertainty of her future weighed heavily on her and her family. However, the prosecution viewed this as her undergoing the justice process that was deemed necessary, aiming to seek justice for the baby. The case itself was fraught with tension and division. Kim, Skylar's mother, voiced her frustrations with the legal process, feeling that the defense's points were completely disregarded by the prosecution, which she found to be exceedingly cold and dismissive. The prosecution maintained that an innocent life had been unjustly taken, and it was their duty to seek reparation. In July 2019, the case took an unexpected turn when the prosecutor offered Skylar a deal: drop the aggravated murder charge if she pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, thus avoiding a trial but still facing up to 15 years in prison. This proposal brought immense anguish to the Richardson family, but ultimately, the decision rested with Skylar. On one decisive Sunday morning, Skylar resolved not to plead guilty to crimes she maintained she did not commit. She chose to let a jury decide her fate at trial. 2 years after the distressing events, the trial began on September 3, 2019. The prosecution started with a startling revelation, quoting a text message from Skylar to her mother that exposed her troubled emotional state shortly after she secretly gave birth and buried the baby in the backyard. The prosecution also displayed a selfie Skylar had taken at the gym that same day, using these pieces to argue that Skylar had no intention of keeping the baby. Although proving the baby was born alive was a challenge, the prosecution contended that Skylar's own admissions during interrogation supported their case. Witnesses for the prosecution testified that Skylar had seen the baby's arms move and heard her make sounds, suggesting life. They also claimed Skylar might have inadvertently harmed the baby. Moreover, they accused her of trying to burn the baby's remains. Trey Johnson, presented as the baby's father, testified about their brief relationship and the unprotected sexual encounters they had. When it was time for the defense, Skylar's lawyers, argued that she had been subjected to overly aggressive questioning, leading to a coerced confession. They disputed the assumption that she had attempted to burn her baby, noting that the forensic expert who initially supported this claim had later withdrawn it. They presented evidence of Skylar's significant weight fluctuations due to her long-standing battle with anorexia, which they claimed was exacerbated by her mother's pressure to remain thin. During the trial, the doctor who performed the autopsy testified that the baby died from homicidal violence of undetermined origin. Yet, under cross-examination, she admitted there was no physical evidence to support a live birth, or that Skylar had directly caused harm to her child. Witnesses for the prosecution also acknowledged the lack of physical evidence of a live birth, with no trauma or burns found on the baby's remains. The defense stressed that the only evidence suggesting a live birth came from Skylar's statements, which they argued were the result of coercion by the police. An obstetrician also testified that he didn't believe the baby was alive at birth. He noted that the umbilical cord wasn't cut, he suggested that Skylar's eating disorder might have limited the baby's growth in the womb, possibly leading to a stillbirth or death shortly after birth. An expert on police questioning explained that some interrogation techniques can push people into false confessions, especially those who are more vulnerable to pressure. A clinical psychologist who talked to Skylar found she has a dependent personality disorder, which could make her more likely to give in to authority figures. The trial moved forward with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. The defense attorney emphasized that Skylar is innocent until proven guilty, urging the jury to stand by her if they had any doubts about the baby's condition at birth. The prosecution argued that Skylar had ended a life to keep up appearances and should be held accountable. The trial was intense, and eventually, the jury had to decide Skylar's fate.
With regard to count one, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of the offense of aggravated murder.
And on September 12th, 2019, after 4 hours, they ruled she wasn't guilty of the most serious charges, but did find her guilty of improperly handling the baby's remains, which could mean up to a year in jail. The Richardson family was relieved by the verdict, but had to wait until sentencing. The next day, Skylar spoke publicly for the first time in court, expressing regret and apologizing for the pain caused by her actions. During a victim impact statement, Trey Johnson's mother spoke about her deep loss, saying no words could fully express her anguish over her granddaughter Annabelle's death. The judge believed different choices by Skylar could have saved her daughter, but sentenced her to 3 years of probation instead of a harsher penalty. The trial and its aftermath deeply affected Skylar and her family, causing her significant stress and health issues. 2 months after being mostly acquitted, Skylar shared her feelings in an interview with Cosmopolitan magazine. She talked about her regrets and the burden of guilt she carries every day for not opening up sooner about her situation. She described the period as devastating and admitted to struggling with depression since the incident. Skylar shared that she named her baby Annabelle because she didn't know anyone else with that name. She visits Annabelle's grave every week to leave pink flowers and finds a bit of peace knowing her baby is at rest. During an interview, Skylar opened up about how the trial almost broke her and even made her think about ending her life. She admitted that living with the truth was incredibly hard, especially when it felt like everyone else thought differently. She also felt like she lost a part of herself during the trial and was scared that people saw her as guilty because of all the news coverage. Trey, Annabelle's dad, told the media that he was shocked by the case because he didn't know about the pregnancy beforehand. It hit him hard when he found out months later in 2018, especially learning about it through social media when everything went public. Trey's family deeply felt the loss, and after the trial, They gathered to mark 2 years since Annabelle's passing. This whole situation really affected everyone involved. They all dealt with a lot of emotions no matter how the court ruled. Over time, Skylar got help for her eating disorders, went to college, and worked at the law firm that represented her. Her probation ended almost 2 years early in 2020. The judge decided there was no need to keep an eye on her since the crime wasn't severe. She had no prior offenses, and she was busy with work and school. In Skylar's first TV interview, her parents talked about how the case impacted them and their daughter. They mentioned a special angel marker at Annabelle's gravesite, expressing how heartbreaking it all was and how sometimes being near the grave brought them a little comfort. They also revealed that Skylar was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, suffering from frequent panic attacks and nightmares that often kept her from sleeping in her own room. In 2022, Skylar's lawyers tried to seal the court records of her conviction to help her move on, arguing that the public didn't need to see them anymore. But the prosecutors disagreed, saying it would lessen how serious her actions were. The judge ultimately decided to restrict access to the records, siding with Skylar's need for privacy, which stirred up new debates.
I didn't know what to do. I ran in the house, I grabbed a cloth and put warm water on it and came back and did the same thing.
Did you do anything to harm him?
She is Melissa Turner, on the brink of a nervous breakdown during this interrogation. Stay until the end of the video to uncover the horrifying truth behind this true crime story.
Melissa was born in Tampa, Florida, and from an early age, she found solace in horror and fantasy films due to her shyness. As a teenager, her love for manga and anime ignited a desire to cosplay, but her weight made her self-conscious. Instead of pursuing her passion, she hid her body under layers of clothing and focused on her studies. After graduating with excellent grades, Melissa faced a $26,000 debt. Feeling depressed, she turned to online health and fitness forums, determined to lose weight. Between 2011 and 2013, she successfully lost 90 pounds, gaining confidence and embracing a more daring style. Proud of her transformation, Melissa started sharing pictures on Tumblr, attracting a large following. She also found love and began dating Cameron. In addition to her personal blog, she created a second one with explicit content, featuring herself as various characters. Her growing online presence led her to the cosplay community she had always dreamed of joining. At a party, a friend mentioned making good money through webcam shows. Initially hesitant, Melissa eventually decided to try it to pay off her debts. By 2014, she was juggling 3 jobs, including webcam shows at night. Realizing the earning potential, she quit her other jobs and focused on webcam modeling, where she could freely express herself and earn a living. After 2 years, the demand started to decline as new girls captured all the public's attention. Melissa decided to seek something new but related to her current work, leading her to the adult film industry. She began filming movies that combined her 2 passions, cosplay and horror. She created a website and her followers quickly grew, as did her social media presence. With this advantage, she opened a Patreon account where her fans could donate to her, receiving thousands of dollars, although she still wanted to earn more. In 2016, she gathered other girls who worked in the same field and complained about not having a fixed place to make their videos. Melissa, along with her boyfriend, opened an erotic photography studio, which was a complete success. However, problems soon arose as she managed everything alone with little help from her partner. After many arguments, they decided to end their relationship. In 2017, the business went bankrupt, and Melissa's self-esteem noticeably declined. She decided to undergo cosmetic surgeries which made her feel invincible, and it was then that she downloaded Tinder, confident she would find new love. Matthew Trussler was born on January 11, 1994 in Massachusetts. From a young age, he was a fun and charismatic boy who loved spending time with his family and friends, who were the center of his life. After graduating from university, he began working as a general manager at an Italian restaurant. Despite his good economic standing in 2015, he decided it was time for a change. He was offered a job in Tampa. Motivated to see more son and his brother who lived there, he accepted the offer. The first few months passed smoothly, and Matthew eventually found a job at another company, this time in technology, which aligned more with his interests. Over the following years, he prospered professionally and continued to build friendships, always managing to bring a smile to everyone he met. However, something was missing in his life: love. Thus, in April 2017, he decided to download Tinder and met none other than Melissa Turner. The connection was almost instant. They began talking daily and soon started a relationship. As both had good economic standings, in December 2018, they bought a house. It was excessively large for two young people, with 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and 2 patios with a pool. On January 11th, Matthew expressed his happiness on Facebook, posting, "A quarter of a century later, I have a mortgage, 4 furry babies, and a wonderful girl. I am a happy man." Shortly after, they got engaged and seemed truly confident in their love. They spent time with their pets and posted pictures where they looked very much in love. But behind closed doors, the situation was very different. Matthew was increasingly distant from his family. They hardly saw him, and he didn't answer their calls. His close ones began to suspect that Melissa wanted to distance him from the rest of the world to have him all to herself. As months went by, things worsened. The few times they managed to talk to Matthew, he avoided questions about his relationship, becoming excessively nervous. By then, his brother was convinced that his sister-in-law was a manipulative and jealous person, suspecting that the couple argued constantly, usually because Matthew did not follow Melissa's orders, as she wanted to control his every move. They weren't the only ones who noticed this strange dynamic. Their neighbors were concerned about the noises coming from the house, believing that Melissa had a temper problem, which was evident during a party they hosted. The couple invited all their friends and played loud music. Initially, there was no issue. It was normal for 2 young people to want to have fun. However, in the middle of the night, loud screams woke up the entire neighborhood. Looking out their windows, they saw Melissa grabbing another girl by the hair and dragging her into the house, but both were in costume, and none of the guests seemed disturbed. They thought it might be some kind of show, but they couldn't have been more wrong. After a while, they continued hearing Melissa, noticeably agitated, and the other girls screaming and pleading. From then on, the neighbors kept a close watch on the young homeowner's behavior, hearing her daily insults toward Matthew, banging on furniture or raising her voice. Finally, on September 20th, 2019, Matthew decided to end the abuse. He told Melissa he no longer wanted to be with her and even made a series of posts on his Facebook account indicating he was single. While his family couldn't get much information from him about this, they noticed he seemed relieved and hoped he would turn to them for comfort, but this never happened. Matthew ended up getting back together with Melissa one last time. The neighbors were sure they would separate again, and they were right, but not in the way they anticipated. On October 17, 2019, the couple went shopping and had lunch at home as if everything was fine. But less than 24 hours later, something terrible happened. Melissa made a frantic and agitated 911 call, saying that the previous night she and her fiancé had consumed a large amount of alcohol and went to bed completely drunk. That morning, when she woke up, she noticed he wasn't there and searched the house, eventually finding him lying on the floor of the backyard in a pool of blood. The police rushed to the house in the Tampa suburbs. Upon arrival, they saw Matthew's body face up near the pool. The first thing Melissa did was tell them she had tried to perform CPR but was unsuccessful. The officers believed her, but something didn't add up. Matthew had cuts on his arm and chest, and Melissa had dried blood all over her body and a cut on her hand. Something wasn't adding up. After confirming the young man's death, the police escorted Melissa to the sheriff's office for additional questioning to understand what really happened. She repeated the same story to the officers that she had told over the phone, recounting that both she and her fiancé had drunk until they fell asleep, and that she found his body in the garden the next day. Meanwhile, the detectives canvassed the neighborhood for clues and noticed something intriguing. A nearby house had a surveillance camera pointed directly at the young couple's home. They quickly checked the footage from this camera, suspecting it could provide valuable evidence, and they were right. They also discovered the security cameras in the house. With this crucial discovery, they returned to the station to share their findings with the other investigators. Melissa remained very calm until they showed her the videotapes. The footage captured audio of an argument coming from the backyard of their house at 4:31 a.m. A female voice, likely Melissa's, could be heard saying, "Stay down." Just seconds later, the sound of glass breaking was audible, followed by the same voice saying, "So just die already." Over the next few minutes, the situation escalated with the woman repeating, "I hate you," and "Get up now," several times. Then came the sound of slaps and what might have been a man's voice, though it was unintelligible. Around 4:44, the female voice screamed, "No," and a minute later said something unclear, but to the investigators it sounded like, "What have I done?" The most chilling part was the videos from the house's security cameras. It showed Matthew walking very calmly while Melissa followed, hunched over and visibly angry. Although the image wasn't very clear, it was evident that it was them. What caught the officers' attention most was the visible blood on Melissa's hand, leading them to theorize that she had injured herself while stabbing her fiancé. After watching the tape, Melissa was speechless. Initially, she claimed not to remember having any argument, but as hours passed, she realized she couldn't keep lying and had to tell the real story, or at least what she claimed was the truth. She recounted that she was sleeping when Matthew woke her up in a state of drunkenness, which infuriated her. They started arguing and she reproached him for still drinking at 4 in the morning. The fight escalated and moved to the kitchen. There, Matthew threw a knife on the counter and began strangling her. Scared and thinking he was going to kill her, Melissa grabbed the knife from his hand and stabbed him in the back to escape. She also explained that after the fight, she tried to clean the house and realized they had broken some glass. While picking it up, she cut her hand, which supposedly explained her injury. The detectives found this story highly suspicious, and everything became even stranger when the autopsy results arrived. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had a defensive wound on his right forearm, a large laceration on his chest, a small cut on his right shoulder, and a significant wound on his back from a stab. The medical examiner indicated that the cause of death was an incision in the arm that perforated the cephalic vein. It was entirely impossible for him to be more injured than Melissa if he had started the fight, as she only had the cut on her hand. That same day, Melissa was arrested for second-degree murder and taken to jail, where she would await trial without bail. When Matthew's family learned what had happened, they were devastated. His brother and his fiancée quickly expressed their suspicions to the police. They said that Melissa had isolated Matthew long before killing him, recounting how she had distanced him from all his loved ones and insisting she was far from an innocent girl. They believed she had manipulated the young man who, according to them, was an excellent person. Whether this was true or a complete lie would be determined in court. The trial began on February 14th, 2022, 2 years after Matthew's death. Melissa continued to be charged with murder. Her lawyer argued that it was a case of self-defense, claiming that Melissa had suffered abuse in the relationship and only committed the crime to protect herself. The assistant district attorney did not believe this version. He was convinced that she was drunk and that the situation had gotten out of hand. He suggested that Melissa might have been frustrated with her partner's alcoholism, which led her to harm him. Melissa took the stand and, through tears, declared that she loved Matthew and never intended to harm him. She claimed that he had tried to kill her and that she was only trying to stop him. She also spoke about Matthew's drinking problems, stating that on that night, his blood alcohol level was 5 times the legal limit in Florida, a situation that had occurred on previous occasions. Sometimes, he had even experienced hallucinations, staring fixedly at a corner and telling her that the devil was standing right there. Regarding Matthew's mental health, she said he had mistreated her several times and suffered from depression but refused to seek help, not wanting to tell even his family. Lastly, Melissa spoke about the day of the crime, saying she didn't know how Matthew ended up with so many injuries on his body. She only remembered stabbing him once in the back to free herself from being strangled. Melissa's mother also defended her in court, explaining that her daughter had never been a troublesome person and always tried to avoid problems by hiding her pain. Despite these statements, there were many testimonies indicating that Melissa did not appear to have acted in self-defense. One key piece of evidence was the police report, showing that the emergency call was made almost 4 hours after the stabbing occurred, which was evident from the time on Matthew's watch that tracked his heart rate. When the first responders arrived, Melissa initially claimed she had no idea what had happened to her boyfriend, only stating that she found him in the backyard. Her first mistake was lying in that statement. Matthew's mother took the stand to defend her son's memory, calling Melissa's story fabricated and expressing that her statements hurt as much as the crime itself. She addressed her former daughter-in-law directly, saying they both knew Matthew was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and that if he were there, the sentence Melissa was about to receive would have caused him great distress. However, none of these statements were as valuable as the video footage. An audio expert testified that the audio had been enhanced, making it clear that the couple argued and that Melissa verbally abused Matthew. Melissa's lawyer tried to defend her again, arguing that the audio had been manipulated. He found it suspicious that his client's voice was so loud while Matthew's was only a murmur, suggesting it had been edited to amplify the volume and make the shouts seem much worse. Nevertheless, he acknowledged that Melissa could be heard in the footage saying things like, "I hate you, get up, and die." He also admitted that there were sounds resembling slaps. The prosecution countered that the recording had not been altered and that there was no doubt Melissa would be convicted. On February 18th, 2022, the much-anticipated day arrived for Matthew's family. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before reaching a decision. The judge rejected the self-defense claim, and Melissa was found guilty of second-degree murder. During the session, a juror remarked that he believed Melissa had lost her mind, noting that she knew Matthew would die after the attack, but still didn't call the police or an ambulance. On March 18th, a month after the verdict, Melissa returned to court for her sentencing. She received 20 years and 5 months in prison, which she would serve in a Florida state prison. The victim's family celebrated the decision. Matthew's sister-in-law stated that justice had been served, but only to a certain extent. Matthew's brother expressed how much he missed his brother, saying he was a good guy who was just starting to become a man. The reality is that we'll never know what would have happened if the two young people had separated. But one thing is certain: Melissa decided to kill Matthew without remorse. In 2014, during a routine traffic stop in Smith County, Mississippi, an incredibly disturbing case came to light. The police were drawn to a truck due to a strong odor emanating from it. As the officer asked the driver for his paperwork, he observed that the man appeared anxious and confused. The vehicle reeked of decay, and upon further investigation, the driver was identified as 37-year-old Timothy Jones, Jr. The situation became even more concerning when the officers learned that Jones had 5 children. Yet, the truck was empty, containing only some clothing items. When asked about his children, Jones initially denied having any, then changed his story, claiming he had 3 children who were supposedly in South Carolina. This inconsistency raised suspicions, prompting the officer to detain Jones for further questioning. What they discovered rendered them speechless. Timothy Jones Jr. and Amber Kaiser, a divorced couple with 5 children all under the age of 9, Mara Grace, Elias Xavier, Natan Hayside, Gabriel Asher, and Elaine Marie. They lived in Lexington, South Carolina. When Amber met Timothy, she was drawn to his world and felt connected to him and his lifestyle. They were teenagers when they met and married very young. Timothy attended school in Mississippi while Amber focused on homemaking. From a young age, Timothy witnessed his mother's mental health deteriorate due to schizophrenia. She eventually required constant care and left home to work in intimate services, with his family telling Timothy she had simply gone far away and abandoned him. His father, Timothy Jones Sr., who was 20 at the time, moved with Timothy to his grandmother's house, where he was exposed to domestic violence, substance abuse, and alcohol. Despite his tough upbringing, Timothy showed a talent for numbers, solving math problems with ease, and could disassemble and reassemble computers to make them faster. He seemed to have a natural understanding of how machines worked. However, things changed when Timothy reached adolescence and began hearing voices at the age of 10. By middle school, he had started using drugs and drinking excessively. At 15, he suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident, which affected his frontal lobe, the brain area controlling impulses and linked to psychopathy in various studies. After the accident, Timothy's behavior became erratic and stubborn. He was also very jealous of his father, feeling that anyone who had a relationship with him took away his father's attention. Over time, Timothy believed his father didn't love him and feared he would end up abandoned. Despite his growing intelligence, his emotional development was stunted, leaving him with the mentality of a child and lacking common sense and empathy. After finishing high school, Timothy Jones Jr. dreamed of joining the elite U.S. Navy SEALs. His intelligence earned him a chance to study there, but he faced a major hurdle. He lacked athletic talent and discipline, lasting only a few weeks in training. Often found crying out of frustration, he struggled to keep up with the rigorous demands. This led to depression, and a subsequent drug test revealed substance abuse, resulting in his expulsion. In 2000, Timothy began associating with individuals involved in bad things. One day, the police found him in possession of illegal substances and discovered he had been writing checks in his father's name. The police warned Jones's father that he had to press charges against his son or face arrest himself. In 2001, Timothy Jones Jr. was sent to a labor camp in an Illinois state prison for a year. Upon release, he seemed transformed, having found religion as a guiding force in his life. He memorized significant portions of religious texts and aspired to live strictly by them. Jones met Amber, the mother of his children, while they both worked at an amusement park in Chicago. After some time, in 2004, he invited her to his Pentecostal church. Within weeks, they decided to marry, adhering to the church's expectation for immediate marriage. Amber was 19 and Timothy was 22. Soon, Amber realized the church's strictness. Women couldn't cut their hair, wear pants, makeup, or jewelry, and Timothy believed that women should be submissive to their husbands, be fruitful, and multiply. Timothy was deeply religious, dedicating himself entirely to the church. Many advised him against taking the Bible literally, but he remained steadfast. The young couple quickly had 3 children, Mara, Elias, and Natan, each born a year apart. With their growing family, they moved to Mississippi, where Timothy eventually graduated with highest honors from the state university, earning a degree in computer science and engineering. Timothy Jones Jr. managed all of this while being married, having children, and working various jobs. His family couldn't have been prouder. Tim was truly a remarkable genius with a promising future. Everything seemed to be going well for him. He landed a job as a computer chip manufacturer at Intel, which Amber saw as their ticket to a better life. After living in student housing in Mississippi, they dreamed of raising their 3 children in a bigger house and even considered hiring a nanny. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Tim chose to buy a rundown trailer on a dirt road in Red Bank because he dreamed of living on a farm. He bought animals to raise, and Amber stayed home with the kids and the animals in this isolated area. She didn't have a car or know how to drive. By 2012, the couple had 2 more children, and problems began to arise. Tim doubted the paternity of their youngest daughter, Elaine, and wanted Amber to homeschool the children, though she only had a high school education. Amber felt increasingly isolated with no family nearby and Tim's family in Mississippi. She felt inferior to her intelligent and educated husband. Tensions escalated when Tim accused Amber of having an affair with a neighbor. The marriage crumbled and they considered divorce. Tim didn't want Amber in the children's lives, so he visited a therapist and asked for a sworn statement for his divorce lawyer, claiming he was fit to raise the children alone. Amber, without a lawyer and unsure what to do, eventually decided it was best for the children to stay with their father, as she had nothing to offer, no job or education. Tim gained primary custody as the sole financial provider, and Amber was granted regular visitation rights. She left her husband and children. Mentally, Tim was losing control, anguished by his failed marriage. He began using drugs and drinking again, struggling with the voices in his head. He became easily angered over minor things, and Amber reported that he once beat her in front of their children until she lost consciousness. Unable to manage work and home, he hired a nanny service. Despite his condition, the first 2 nannies noted that his home was immaculate, and he was dedicated and attentive to his children. Later, he switched services and hired 17-year-old Crystal, who had a young daughter. The nanny soon became his lover, and Tim tried to indoctrinate her into his religion, insisting she adopt the church's customs, wearing long dresses, growing her hair out, and being subordinate to him. When she refused, their relationship deteriorated. Crystal later testified that Tim was extremely harsh with his children, making them stand on their toes for hours as he believed punishment was necessary for their sick bodies. She left after catching him trying to hit her young daughter. After Crystal left, Tim hired another nanny. She noticed a drastic change in Tim. His once clean home was now filled with trash and dirty clothes, and there were even cockroaches. Over time, Timothy Jones Jr. became increasingly violent, punishing his children daily. He developed the habit of feeding them only oatmeal throughout the day, limiting them to one meal. In August 2014, the nanny contacted South Carolina's social services to report the conditions in Tim's home. She described the lack of food and the physical abuse the children suffered. The abuse was so severe that the teachers at the elementary school, attended by the older children, had already reported it to the agency months earlier. The agency had previously required Jones to sign a written promise never to mistreat or hit his children again, as they often arrived at school with bruises. When asked about the injuries, the children said their father would grab them by the neck and slam them against the wall. On the afternoon of Thursday, August 28, 2014, Tim picked up his 3 older children from elementary school, then his 2 younger ones from the nanny. Around 7 p.m., Timothy got angry about some broken outlets in their mobile home. He questioned his 6-year-old son, Natan, about the damage. When Natan said he didn't know, Timothy forced Natan to do push-ups, squats, and other exercises before having him repeat the circuit over and over again. Whenever Natan would slow down, Timothy would whip him with a belt. While Natan was being punished, Amber, Tim's ex-wife, called to speak with her children. The calls were logged at 7 o'clock, 7:02, 7:05, and 7:09, until Timothy finally answered at 7:10. During the call, Natan told his mother about the punishment for the broken outlets, saying it was an accident. Enraged, Timothy ended the call, telling Amber to stop protecting the boy. After hours of torture, Natan was exhausted, dehydrated, and begging for it to end. He collapsed, putting an end to it all. Timothy carried him to bed and left him alone without water or aid. Phone records show that Amber tried to call back 8 more times. At 8:30, Timothy searched for an explicit scene from the movie American History on YouTube, despite knowing his son was already unresponsive. Around 1 a.m., Jones took his 8-year-old daughter, Mara, to a local convenience store to buy 10 packs of cigarettes. Upon returning home, he grabbed Mara and began to strangle her. Next, Timothy went to his 7-year-old son, Elias, and did the same thing. After that, he removed his belt and went to Gabriel, who was 2, and Elaine, who was 1. He placed the belt around their necks and pulled until they stopped breathing. Seeing that none of the children were moving, he took their sheets and blankets, wrapped them separately, and placed them in the back seat of his car. On Friday, August 29th, Jones's father called him at around 7:43 a.m., but there was no answer. At 9:36, the nanny called, and on her second attempt, Jones answered. She asked if he would be dropping the younger kids at daycare, and he told her not to worry, saying he would take them next week, mentioning that they were out and would return by Tuesday. That morning, he drove from place to place. Between noon and 2 p.m., he searched online for drugs out of state. At 12:17, Jones was near Alabama, and his grandmother called him multiple times, but he did not answer and continued to ignore her messages throughout the day, totaling 23 attempts. Between 3 and 5 p.m., Jones searched online for tobacco shops in Alabama and Mississippi and for camping sites in South Carolina. At 8:04 p.m., his location was recorded in Georgia. The next day, August 30th, his grandmother continued sending messages, asking why he wasn't responding to her calls. His phone's location was recorded in Red Bank, New Jersey. On August 31st at 10:08 a.m., Jones searched the internet for camping stores and RV parks in South Carolina landfills, Lexington County landfills, and animal services, in addition to 2 songs. At 4:54 p.m., the nanny texted Timothy Jones Jr. to remind him to bring diapers when he dropped off Gabriel in a lane on Tuesday. An hour later, he replied, saying he had left South Carolina with the children to start fresh and asked her to clean the mobile home, offering her to take whatever she wanted from the belongings he left behind. His ex-wife called him at 7 p.m., but he did not answer. On September 1st, he was driving from place to place. The next morning at 10:35, he searched the internet for body in landfill, how to make muriatic acid, camping near Colombia, countries with no extradition laws, and facing legal problems, where should I run? Throughout the day, he received text messages from the nanny informing him she had cleaned the mobile home. His boss at Intel also messaged him, asking if he was coming to work. At around 6 p.m., Amber called, but he did not answer. On the morning of September 3rd, a co-worker called twice without getting a response. Later, Timothy was captured on surveillance video at a well-known store, buying a saw, muriatic acid, garbage bags, a 5-gallon bucket, and goggles. At 3:37 a.m., he searched online for Tim Jones's missing children. His location was recorded in Charlton, South Carolina. At 6:33 a.m. on September 4th, he was seen at a bank, depositing a check for $3,518. The next day, September 5th, his location was tracked to Louisville, Georgia. His phone was only turned on once that day. On the morning of September 6th, Jones placed the decomposing bodies of his children in black plastic garbage bags and left them in a clearing along a forest road in a rural area in Alabama. This was recorded at 9:14 a.m. The bodies had been in the back seat of Timothy Jones Jr.'s vehicle since August 29th. By 7 p.m. on September 6th, he was stopped at a traffic checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi. A police officer approached the vehicle and noticed a putrid odor emanating from inside. Additionally, the carpet appeared to be stained with bleach, as if it had been recently cleaned. The sheriff requested Jones's identification and the car's registration. He observed that Jones seemed to be under the influence of drugs. Upon checking his information, the police officer found out he was wanted in South Carolina over a child welfare issue. When asked about his children's whereabouts, Jones first claimed he had no children, then said he had 3 children who were in South Carolina. The officers asked for the phone numbers of his father, grandmother, and ex-wife to verify the children's safety. After making the calls, they immediately arrested Jones. The police mentioned that as soon as Jones was placed in the patrol car, he became emotional and started telling the officers what he had done to the children. He explained that he felt a deep sorrow and angered because one of his sons was playing with an electrical outlet. He grabbed the boy by the neck and choked him until he passed out. After that, he did the same to his other son, using a belt because his hands were too large. When his eldest daughter walked in and saw what was happening, he grabbed her and choked her with his hands until she turned purple. In another account, Jones said that when he saw his son playing with the electrical outlet, he believed the boy was trying to harm him, which led him to kill his son. In an audio recording, investigators are heard discussing how Timothy Jones Jr. forced his 6-year-old son, Nathan, to do hours of physical exercises after the boy accidentally turned off the electrical outlets in the family's living room. Jones told investigators that he eventually sent Natan to bed, only to find him dead later when he checked on him. When asked why he did it, Jones mentioned that he killed his children because he heard voices in his head and believed his children were conspiring against him. He also thought his children would be happier in heaven. During his days on the run, Jones traveled through the southeast with the bodies of his 5 children under blankets in his car. He ultimately dumped their bodies in a remote forest in Alabama before being arrested by chance during a routine traffic stop in Mississippi. By September 9th, after giving his second statement, Tim claimed he didn't mean to do it. He said the punishment imposed on Natan got out of hand, and when he went to the boy's room, he found him lifeless due to the strenuous exercises. Not knowing what to do, he decided to end the lives of all his children. The pathologist mentioned that after the autopsy, she couldn't definitively establish the cause of death. However, she suggested that Natan might have been so weakened from the excessive exercise that it didn't take much force for his father to finish him off. Investigators questioned why Jones didn't call 911 if it was truly an accident. Instead, he tried to hide and dispose of his children. That same day, Tim agreed to lead investigators to the location where he had dumped the bodies. On September 10th, the remains of his 5 children were recovered. On September 11th, the evidence collected from Jones's car was turned over to South Carolina authorities. Among the items cataloged were family photos, children's clothing, drawings by the children, letters to the children written by their mother Timothy Jones's diploma from Mississippi State University, and Jones's passport. There were also handwritten notes by Timothy Jones Jr., which included to-do lists such as removing bodies, grinding bones into powder or small pieces, burning bodies, and items like camping supplies, gas, and muriatic acid. On September 13, 2014, Jones was admitted to a correctional institution and placed in a special cell, away from the general population. Since his incarceration, Jones has been evaluated by mental health professionals, including psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and forensic experts. Opinions among these professionals varied. Some diagnosed him with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or personality disorder, suggesting that his mental state at the time of the crime might have been worsened by drug use and the traumatic brain injury he suffered at 15, which could have contributed to an underlying psychosis. These theories were presented to the jury during the trial. However, other specialists argued that Tim was mentally competent and that his actions to conceal evidence, including his children, indicated that he knew he had done something morally and legally wrong. His internet search history further suggested he knew exactly what he was doing and what needed to be done. The prosecution argued that Tim cracked under the stress of a broken marriage and the demands of caring for 5 young children. According to his statements, the trigger for his actions was his wife's alleged infidelity with their neighbor at the time, who is now her husband. She testified that she never committed adultery and that her relationship with the neighbor began after her divorce. The trial took place in late May 2019, involving weeks of intense testimonies and evidence presented against Timothy. The crime is considered one of the worst murders in South Carolina's history. Mara's last words to her father were, "Daddy, I love you." When police searched the house after the crime, they found Natan's favorite toy from Toy Story, broken into pieces. Natan seemed to be the most severely punished, yet all testimonies agreed on one thing: the children loved their father. On June 13, 2019, after 2 hours of deliberation, Timothy Jones Jr. was sentenced to death. He is currently in solitary confinement at a correctional institution, wearing a green jumpsuit that identifies him as a death row inmate. This tragic case ended the lives of innocent children due to marital problems, with both the father and mother making irreversible mistakes.
You smothered her laugh, you crushed her smile, and you left us with the nightmare of the unimaginable.
Ingrid Marie Rounsaville was born on August 2, 1975, in Renton, Washington State. She was the only daughter of Yorga Bass, a devoted mother and her only known direct relative. Ingrid completed her high school education at Canyon del Oro High School in Tucson, Arizona, in 1993. Following graduation, she pursued a nursing degree at a local university and earned her Bachelor of Science in Nursing 4 years later. About 3 years after her graduation, Ingrid returned to Washington where she met Philip Line. The couple eventually married, and Ingrid took his surname, becoming Ingrid Line for the rest of her life. The joys of motherhood followed her marriage, with the birth of her daughters, Reese, Brooke, and Noelle, each born 2 years apart. Her daughters were consistently her greatest joy and purpose in life. Around 2014, Ingrid's marriage to Philip encountered difficulties, leading to a divorce that was finalized amicably, with both parents sharing custody of their daughters. Despite the separation, Ingrid retained her vibrant, energetic personality. At this time, she was working as a nurse at the Swedish Medical Center, where she was highly regarded by doctors, patients, and fellow staff for her dedication and professional commitment. Her career was undoubtedly the second most important aspect of her life. Her relationship with Philip evolved into a supportive friendship, easing the co-parenting of their daughters. This emotional maturity greatly benefited their children's upbringing. Additionally, the presence of Yorga, Ingrid's mother, was a constant source of support, playing a crucial role in her life and the lives of her granddaughters. 2 years post-divorce, by 2016, Ingrid was well settled. She enjoyed her job, which provided a satisfactory income, and lived with her 3 daughters in Renton, Washington, just a 32-minute drive from her workplace. Socially, she was fortunate to have genuine friendships, which enriched her life further. It could be said that Ingrid was content with her life, and she felt the same. Yet in her early 40s, she found herself longing for a romantic partner, a desire unmet by her social circle. Consequently, she decided to explore online dating. After encountering various men on the app, none seemed suitable for a deeper connection until she finally met someone who caught her interest. John Charlton, born in the late 1970s in Seattle, was the son of Ray and Joanne Charlton, both military personnel with strict expectations regarding the behavior of John and his sister Shannon. They aimed high for their children's futures, providing them with the best education possible and expecting them to help with household chores. However, it soon became clear that John was not living up to his parents' dreams. He harbored resentment towards them and others, a sentiment that followed him throughout his life. John's frustrations often surfaced, especially when he was under the influence of alcohol or drugs, substances to which he frequently turned. His legal troubles began in 1997 with a misdemeanor assault charge in King County, followed by a charge of reckless driving in Washington State the next year. Over time, the relationship between John and his parents deteriorated, reaching a breaking point in 2006 when, exhausted, Ray and Joanne sought a protective order against him. They had tried everything to make living together bearable, but their son's erratic and inexplicable behavior made basic agreements impossible. John's increasingly threatening demeanor led to the protective order request in Thurston County, where Ray stated that his son was verbally abusive and often tried to provoke fights. However, this request for a protective order was later denied. Ray informed the court that his son's problematic substance use stemmed from immense pressure he felt, which he believed was causing significant mental instability. On June 24, 2006, south of Ogden, a woman and her baby were waiting in the back seat of their van while her husband shopped in a bookstore. Suddenly, John appeared, demanded they exit the vehicle, and drove away with it. The police were promptly notified, and the van was spotted on Interstate 15. An officer followed it to a store parking lot in Riverdale, Utah, where John was arrested. According to Utah's police and judicial records, John was charged with aggravated robbery. He agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of attempted aggravated robbery and was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. However, he only served about 21 months and was released on June 24, 2008. Just a few months later, John added to his criminal record with a felony robbery conviction in Montana and a misdemeanor assault in Idaho. He spent approximately 3.5 years in prison before being released onto the streets in 2012. From that point on, details about his life became murky. One factor that perhaps made John more dangerous was his physical attractiveness. He was a handsome man with a charismatic personality when he chose to be. With these traits, he began to explore other ways of causing harm through romance and seduction, only to later unleash his anger. One thing was certain: John was not an ordinary person, and neither was his daily life. Around mid-2012, he took a temporary job where he started a relationship with a coworker named. Initially, she was taken in by his charm. However, there were some signs that, although not entirely clear to her, made her cautious. Something about him, something unsettling and mysterious in his demeanor. Trusting her instincts, she decided to end the relationship. By 2013, they had parted ways. After that, there was a string of women in his life, whose identities remained confidential for security reasons. These women were later consulted by authorities regarding John's criminal career and personality traits. In their subsequent statement, the ex-girlfriends revealed details such as aggressive and dangerous behavior, as well as confessions of major crimes he claimed to have committed, the veracity of which authorities were trying to ascertain. Broadly speaking, John lacked stability in both his work and personal life. Essentially a homeless day laborer, he would either sleep on the streets or stay at the homes of ex-girlfriends, with whom he maintained casual relationships. Among his friends, John was known as a reserved individual, but alcohol and illicit substances would often transform him into someone nearly unrecognizable. This complex character, whose physical attractiveness often opened doors for him, was the same man Ingrid met through an online dating site. After exchanging messages and finding mutual interest, they agreed to meet in person. Their first date was set for Friday, April 8th. The plan was to watch the Seattle Mariners' opening game and then, if things went well, go out for drinks afterward. On the eve of their date, Ingrid shared her plans with friends and coordinated with Philip so he could look after the girls that evening. On April 8th, John and Ingrid attended the baseball game, which started just after 7 p.m. They enjoyed themselves enough to continue the evening at a local bar. Around 10:35 p.m., Ingrid texted a friend to confirm that everything was going smoothly with her new acquaintance. However, the night took a sinister turn shortly after. It appears that Ingrid brought John back to her home. Instead of the intimacy she had hoped for, she met a tragic end. The seemingly pleasant man she met online revealed his darkest side. He not only took her life, but also dismembered her body using a sharp gardening tool. After cleaning the crime scene, he placed the parts into plastic bags he had found in the kitchen. He then took Ingrid's car keys and drove her vehicle, a 2015 Toyota Highlander, to Seattle, where he disposed of the remains. John likely continued to drink alcohol after disposing of the evidence, as he did not show up at his ex-girlfriend's house later that night or the next morning, even though she had expected him early on Saturday and was surprised by his absence. Meanwhile, that same morning, Philip arrived at his ex-wife's house around 10 a.m. to drop off the girls. Despite repeatedly knocking, he received no response. He then took a closer look around and noticed that Ingrid's vehicle, which was usually parked outside, was missing. This was particularly odd because he knew Ingrid was off work that day, which was why she had made plans to go out the previous night. Ingrid was a devoted mother who always wanted her daughters close by, and she was invariably at home when Phil brought them over. If her romantic evening had gone on longer than expected, they had a trusting enough relationship that she would have told him to keep the girls longer. Concerned by her absence, Phil repeatedly knocked on the door and tried calling her cell phone several times, all attempts unsuccessful. He then decided to contact Ingrid's mother. Shortly after, Jorga arrived with a spare set of keys Ingrid had given her for emergencies. Upon entering the house, they immediately noticed Ingrid's wallet, purse, and cell phone were left behind, but there was no sign of Ingrid herself. She quickly checked the last messages on her daughter's phone and saw messages from John about the date. She then sent a text to John, asking if he knew anything about Ingrid's whereabouts. He replied that they had indeed gone out the previous night but had parted ways after the game because she needed to return home to her daughters. She informed him that a police officer would need to speak with him since he might have been the last person to see her. After that, all communication from John ceased, prompting Ingrid's mother to alert the authorities. A few hours later, while the police began their investigation, a Seattle resident was about to make a horrifying discovery. As he was taking out his recycling, he noticed 3 white kitchen bags at the bottom of another bin, out of place because kitchen waste is organic and does not belong in the recycling. When he went to correct this mistake and picked up the first bag, he was struck by its unusual weight and nearly professional packaging. Seconds later, he was staring in horror at the outline of a face protruding from the bag. Shocked, he called a neighbor to confirm what he was seeing. Both, still in disbelief, contacted emergency services. The police and forensic team arrived within minutes. Inside those 3 bags were human remains, a leg and foot, part of an arm, and a head. Back in Washington, as panic spread among dozens of Ingrid's friends and family, they took to social media to alert the community, the police, and the media about her disappearance. Suspicion quickly fell on the man she had dated last. Meanwhile, John visited his ex-girlfriend's house. Though she noticed he had a swollen lip, he dismissed it as nothing significant. He claimed it was the result of an attempted robbery the night before he went out to a bar. Meanwhile, the Seattle police soon learned that their counterparts in Renton were searching for a missing woman. Coupled with social media posts, this information helped them connect the dots. After comparing the photos shared online with the remains found, they identified them as belonging to the same person. A search warrant was issued for Ingrid's home, where a thorough search revealed an almost empty box of garbage bags, similar to those found in the dumpster. Bloody traces were found in the bathtub drain, and perhaps most damning, a pruning saw with blood, tissue, and bone on its serrated blade was found leaning against the bathroom wall. The examination of Ingrid's computer allowed officers to access her purchase of tickets for the Mariners game. Considering the link she had with Phil, The police initially pursued this lead since an ex-husband might harbor resentments. However, he was quickly ruled out. The car was located in downtown Seattle on the night of April 11, 2016. The police lifted 3 fingerprints from underneath the driver's door handle, where they also found the same type of white garbage bags. Subsequently, the officers interviewed John. His online dating profile indicated he wasn't looking for anything serious, but that was not a crime. At first glance, he seemed like a normal guy. When asked about his residence to ensure they could contact him again if needed, he admitted to not having a fixed place to live. The officers sensed some discomfort when they asked about Ingrid. In his account, he said that after the baseball game, they took a bus and went to Ingrid's house. He believed there might have been an intimate encounter, but he wasn't sure because he had passed out. He added that she had not wanted to introduce him to her daughters and had later left him downtown. He woke up hours later on a bench in front of a building. Regarding his last interaction with Ingrid, or at least what he remembered of it, John claimed to have sent her a message that morning asking how she had slept. As the investigators delved deeper into his story, they uncovered his peculiar relationship with his ex-girlfriend, but that was not illegal either. John eventually asked for a lawyer. The officers left the room but did not stop the video recording. If everyone already thought he was odd, what happened next confirmed it. The cameras captured John rolling up his sweatshirt to use as a pillow while he took a nap on the floor. The next step involved interviewing John's ex-girlfriend, who reported that he arrived later than expected that Saturday and noted his bruised lip.
Wow, yeah, I'm ready to get home.
However, this was not particularly surprising to the agents, as they had already observed an abrasion on his head and scratches on his chin, chest, and arms. Simultaneously, the analysis confirmed that the fingerprints on Ingrid's car matched John's. Consequently, on Monday, April 11, 2016, John was brought before a judge who set his bail at $5 million, a sum he could not afford, resulting in his detention as the primary suspect in Ingrid's murder. Several of John's former friends and ex-partners came forward to assist the police with the investigation. Additionally, an extensive search for the rest of Ingrid's body commenced, involving the FBI and other regional law enforcement agencies due to the grisly nature of the crime. John was assigned a public defender who argued that no forensic evidence or expert testimony linked him to the crime. Nevertheless, on Tuesday, April 12th, the judge dismissed these arguments and found probable cause to hold him on a charge of second-degree murder. That evening, hundreds gathered near Ingrid's home for a vigil to honor her memory. Those who knew her highlighted her excellent human qualities, and friends present expressed that the pain of her loss felt like an open wound. They acknowledged that the hardest impact was on her family, particularly her mother and 3 daughters, who were deeply affected by the tragedy. The following day, Wednesday, April 13th, the county coroner's office officially confirmed that the remains were Ingrid's. The preliminary autopsy report listed blunt force trauma as the cause of death, although the exact date of the crime could not be determined. 2 days later, a sanitation worker found more body parts in a different recycling bin. On April 18th, a man received a phone call from a neighbor. Inside his recycling bin, a torso with a pierced navel was discovered. Ingrid had a navel piercing, confirming the remains were hers. As part of gathering evidence for the trial, police returned to Ingrid's house. This time, they dismantled the plumbing and found more blood in the newly exposed drain trap. They also used a chemical called luminol, which glows in the presence of blood traces, confirming that the crime scene had been cleaned. Despite the initial findings in the preliminary autopsy report, further examination of the body by the forensic pathologist revealed more details. Upon closer inspection, small signs of bleeding were found in Ingrid's eyes. Additionally, marks on her neck led to the definitive conclusion that she had been strangled, and subsequently, her body was dismembered in her own home. The toxicology report indicated that Ingrid had no drugs in her system, but her blood alcohol content was 0.74. On October 2, 2017, in a King County courtroom, John pled guilty to first-degree premeditated murder. His guilty plea was part of a plea bargain that resulted in a shortened trial, sparing Ingrid's family and the community from the ordeal of a lengthy and distressing jury trial. However, his plea was not solely an act of mercy to alleviate the victim's family's suffering. It also afforded him certain procedural benefits. The sentencing hearing took place on January 5, 2018. John's parents attended the court in a dual show of support for their son and respect for the grief that Ingrid's family was enduring. During his brief statement in court, John acknowledged that no words could suffice to ease the pain he had caused, admitting the irreversible harm of his actions. The impact statements from Ingrid's family then resonated deeply. Phil condemned John for taking away a vital companion and the mother of their children, lamenting the maternal guidance and cherished family moments that his daughters would now forever miss. He emphasized that due to John's actions, his daughters would never again receive maternal advice. A friend of Ingrid, visibly shaken, spoke to the brutality with which John ended her dear friend's life, labeling him a coward who initially tried to flee and hide. When finally cornered by the police, instead of owning up to his actions, he claimed he was too drunk to remember what he had done. Addressing John, the judge expressed her wish to imprison him for life if it were possible. Instead, she sentenced him to 27 years and 9 months in prison, adhering to the recommendation of the prosecutors as part of the plea deal that facilitated the shortened trial. Ultimately, the sentence handed down was the harshest possible under state sentencing guidelines. A member of John's defense team expressed hope that his guilty plea and the prison sentence might offer some closure and perhaps a measure of peace to Ingrid's loved ones. When the sentencing was reported in the media, there was significant public outcry. Many expressed their dismay, particularly because John could potentially be released by the age of 60. Furthermore, his failure to provide a motive for his actions did not work in his favor. In early April 2011, for the first time in years, the shutters of house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann remained closed. This house, located in a residential neighborhood of Nantes, France, belonged to the Dupon de Ligonnès family. The family comprised Xavier, Agnès, and their 4 teenage children. The unusual silence around the usually lively home caught the neighbors' attention. Typically filled with the sounds of the children and their 2 dogs, the sudden quiet was alarming. Known for keeping their shutters open even when on vacation, the closed shutters prompted the neighbors to alert the local police, fearing something might have happened. During an initial inspection, the officers found no trace of the family. However, it was on the 5th inspection that they made a horrific discovery. Located in the western suburbs of Paris, Versailles is the birthplace of Xavier Dupon de Ligonnès, born on March 9, 1961. He was the eldest son of the French Count Bernard Hubert Dupont de Ligonnès and his wife Geneviève Thérèse Maître. In 1966, the family welcomed a daughter named Christine. When Bernard left his wife for a lover, Xavier assumed a leadership role within his family, taking care of his mother and sister Christine. Geneviève claimed to receive divine messages, which she recorded during automatic writing sessions, similar to a surrealist poet. Her peculiar beliefs evolved into sermons about an impending apocalypse, leading her to establish a cult named the Church of Philadelphia. The group included members of the aristocracy, whom Genevieve convinced were chosen to survive the apocalypse and partake in the world's renewal. Christine was designated by her mother to bear the Savior. According to Genevieve, the child would be a reincarnation of both Jesus and Satan, destined to bring salvation. Despite inheriting his father's noble title, Xavier showed little interest in French traditions, instead being fascinated by luxury, high-end cars, and eccentricities. He also admired the United States greatly. Genevieve funded Xavier's lavish lifestyle through significant contributions from cult members who were sworn to secrecy about their activities. In 1974, on the paradisiacal island of Bréa, Xavier met Emmanuel Teneur. The two boys formed a deep bond of mutual understanding, which lasted throughout their lives. It is said that Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier at that time, but despite the rejection, their close friendship remained intact. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnès Hodange. The girl was born on November 9, 1962, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside Paris. She stood out for her deep religious devotion. She worked as an assistant at the Blanche de Castille Catholic School in Nantes, where her responsibilities included teaching catechism. Although little is known about her family background, it is well documented that Xavier and Agnes developed a close relationship, leading to a passionate but brief romance before they went their separate ways. In 1990, Agnes gave birth to her first child, Arthur, from a casual relationship. Soon after, she and Xavier reunited, rekindled their love, and decided to marry. Xavier adopted Arthur as his own son. 2 years later, they welcomed their first son together, Thomas, the heir to the family name. To commemorate the occasion, Xavier chose Emmanuel as Thomas's godfather. Following Thomas, the couple had 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 seemed to embody the ideal family, with Xavier appearing as a loving father and the children excelling academically, suggesting a promising future. Agnes was dedicated to instilling her faith in her children, frequently taking them to Mass. Other parishioners saw her as kind but firm with her children. Around the year 2000, in line with their interests and preferences, Xavier moved his family to the United States. Xavier, a discreet, charismatic, and multilingual man, believed he could blend in seamlessly in the United States. However, this venture failed, leading to significant financial losses. Upon returning to France, he began accumulating substantial debts related to his professional activities, which were always somewhat ambiguous. Various investigations have described him as a salesman. According to French media reports, money troubles had been a significant concern for Xavier for several years. One of his failed ventures included an unusual scheme to import cars from the United States to France. He also started several small businesses, all of which saw limited success. These included a hotel and restaurant guide for sales representatives, a customer loyalty system for restaurants, an association called the French Federation of Commerce, and a discreet business where he was listed as the manager. The accounts for this last enterprise were minimal, and in 2003, he hired 6 salespeople. Xavier's work often took him away from home from Monday to Friday and brought in a meager income, around $4,200 annually in declared earnings. Gradually, financial issues began to strain his marriage, likely exacerbated by typical marital disagreements. In 2004, Agnes wrote extensively on a French forum, detailing the challenges she and her husband faced. Notably, she mentioned that he had once told her that a group death as a family wouldn't be catastrophic. By 2009, the increasing debts severely impacted their relationship, leading to a temporary separation. During this period, Xavier sent numerous letters blaming Agnes for the family's troubles and holding her responsible for their financial ruin. This emotional turmoil took a toll on Agnes, causing her to lose her appetite and struggle with insomnia. On numerous occasions, Xavier turned to his friend Emmanuel for assistance. Emmanuel, hailing from a wealthy family, had inherited a substantial fortune from his father. Despite his wealth, Emmanuel lived modestly in a small apartment. An enigmatic and somewhat eccentric individual, he never hesitated to lend Xavier significant sums of money. In addition to financial support, Emmanuel funded Xavier's travels and even co-signed for the house where Xavier eventually settled with his family in the late 2000s. Thanks to Emmanuel's generosity, the family resided in a chalet located in the suburbs at 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann, west of Nantes. Once settled, the neighbors quickly formed the impression that Agnes was bossy and less pleasant than her husband. Behind closed doors, Agnes faced a personal hell. She viewed Xavier as both too fragile and paradoxically too rigid, almost militaristic. An old-fashioned man, he played the head of the household but was emotionally distant, lacking tenderness and affection, and sometimes even abusive. Furthermore, Agnes confided in her friends from the Thursday prayer group about her fears of how Genevieve controlled Xavier. She described her mother-in-law as a mentally ill mystic and was deeply afraid. On January 20th, 2011, Bernard passed away. Given the disparity between his lifestyle and financial difficulties, Xavier hoped his father's death would result in an inheritance. However, he was in for a shock. Upon delving into his father's estate, he found nothing substantial. All that remained were a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash, which Xavier promptly took. Within hours of Bernard's death, Xavier withdrew cash using his father's card. On February 2nd, he acquired a firearms license, and by March 12th, he had purchased a silencer for the rifle. During this period, he also bought quicklime. He practiced shooting the rifle in his garden, aiming at a balloon on a stand. Emmanuel, who was visiting, tried the rifle and saw nothing suspicious. Xavier explained that the silencer was to avoid disturbing the neighbors. On Friday, April 1st, the two friends went to a shooting range together, where Bernard's inherited rifle was a focal point of interest. The following day, Emmanuel called Xavier 5 times and they spoke for nearly an hour. Investigation suggests that the horror began on Sunday, April 3rd. That night, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the movies and later enjoyed a pleasant evening dining at a restaurant. Everyone was present except for Thomas, who was studying at a Catholic university and lived in a nearby student hostel. After their night out, the family returned to their chalet, where neighbors saw them and some family members even exchanged text messages with friends and acquaintances. Xavier messaged Christine, telling her about their dinner outing. The most accepted theory is that Xavier drugged his wife and children, waited until they were asleep, then shot them and buried them in the garden. He also did the same to the family's 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier's alibi was as macabre as his actions. On Monday morning, he began contacting people related to his family circle from as early as 6 a.m. He called Agnes's workplace to say she was sick and contacted the children's schools, claiming Arthur, Agnes's son from a previous relationship, had a motorcycle accident and that Anne and Benoit were ill. By midday, he sent a letter to the restaurant where Arthur worked, saying Arthur was resigning because his father had been transferred to Australia. He still had Thomas to deal with. On that same Monday, April 4th, Xavier contacted Thomas and had dinner with him at a restaurant near his university residence. After the meal, a tired Thomas returned to his room. The following day, Thomas received an urgent message from his father, claiming that Agnes had a bicycle accident and was in a mild coma at a hospital, prompting Thomas to travel immediately to Nantes. It is presumed that Xavier killed Thomas in the same manner as his siblings and mother. Later that evening, Emmanuel spoke with Xavier again, and this time they talked for just under 19 minutes. At midnight, a friend of Thomas received a message from him, stating he was home watching a movie with his father. Thomas was likely already dead by then. About an hour later, Xavier sent an email to Emmanuel, arranging to meet soon. Emmanuel replied, reminding Xavier that he had power of attorney and that the key was on the sailboat. Contrary to what one might expect, Xavier did not act discreetly. He went in and out of his house, even leaving a note on the door asking not to deliver any more mail. Instead of hiding, he withdrew cash from ATMs and his image was captured by security cameras. He paid with his credit cards at restaurants and stayed in hotels under his real name. As Xavier's perfect escape began, neighbors gradually noticed troubling signs. The once open windows of the chalet had been closed for days. The local children no longer saw the family's 4 children. The dogs' barking had ceased, and Agnes hadn't returned to work. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Piecing together the clues, the concerned neighbors contacted the authorities. Upon arrival, officers found a nearly empty refrigerator with only a few jars of preserves. They discovered a still damp mop in the kitchen, a chess set on the living room table, and guitars on a sofa. It seemed the Dupon de Ligonnès family had vanished. The scene was eerie. Beds were stripped of sheets, picture frames were empty, and closets had missing clothes. In the midst of the mystery, on April 9th, a letter surfaced, sent to family and friends. It claimed that Xavier had been hired by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and that the family had to leave undercover as part of a witness protection program, explaining their sudden disappearance and lack of communication. Suspicion and worry grew among neighbors who felt there was something off about this story. Fearing for the family's lives, they urged authorities to investigate further. Meanwhile, Xavier embarked on a journey through southern France in his car. As the case gained media attention, more details from the past emerged. On April 15th, security cameras captured Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked his car, took a bag, and disappeared into the nearby woods. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. Curiously, on that same day, Emmanuel called his mother, revealing long-held secrets. He was homosexual, alcoholic, and depressed. Responding to the neighbors' pleas and lack of leads, authorities revisited the family home. On April 21st, 2011, a freshly disturbed patch of earth under a terrace caught an officer's attention. They soon uncovered a concrete slab and moments later made a grim discovery. The bodies of Agnes and her 4 children were found, wrapped in bags, each with 2 to 3 gunshot wounds and covered in religious symbols. They had been meticulously buried in burlap sacks with quicklime. The family's 2 Labradors were also found buried. Despite the thorough search, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or DNA were found. Xavier became the most wanted man in France, accused of the massacre. His face dominated the news, earning him titles such as the Most Wanted Man, the Nantes Killer, and the Face of Horror. Yet, it seemed he had mysteriously vanished from the face of the earth. The autopsy results of the 5 bodies revealed to authorities that they were dealing with a meticulously planned execution. Most of the bullets had been fired into the victims' heads. Additionally, traces of a sedative were found in the children, confirming the hypothesis that they were attacked while sleeping. A startling detail emerged regarding Agnes. In the master bedroom, investigators found a device she used to manage her sleep apnea, which had stopped functioning at precisely 3:27 a.m. on April 4th. Investigators speculated that Xavier might have hesitated to kill Thomas, as he was the heir to the family name. Due to the close bond between Xavier and Emmanuel, the latter was summoned by the authorities. Emmanuel appeared cooperative during these initial inquiries, expressing his belief that Xavier's disappearance was a sort of pilgrimage before committing suicide. When questioned about the rifle, Emmanuel initially denied knowledge of it. However, deeper investigation into his life revealed inconsistencies, and authorities soon realized that he was not entirely who he claimed to be. A significant development occurred 24 hours later. Just before noon, Nantes police searched Emmanuel's apartment. They confiscated his laptop, and Emmanuel then disclosed what he truly knew about Xavier's rifle. A subsequent examination of the hard drive uncovered extensive correspondence between Emmanuel and Xavier. These exchanges range from mundane to philosophical, with some emails adding a peculiar tone to their relationship. One email, sent in the early hours of April 6th, particularly caught the police's attention. These accumulated details led investigators to suspect that Emmanuel might have assisted in Xavier's escape. But Emmanuel was not the only suspect. Christine also drew the investigators' scrutiny. During their interviews, Christine and Genevieve were evasive, painting a superficial picture of Xavier and denying any knowledge of the Church of Philadelphia. Genevieve spoke about Xavier's childhood, but avoided uncomfortable topics such as the source of their income, and she outright denied the existence of the sect. However, the diligence of the investigative team paid off. They discovered a copy of a complaint filed years earlier by former sect members who had fled in fear after Christine proposed to have sex with all the men to conceive the chosen one. This revelation about the sect, which included wealthy members providing financial support, was crucial. Investigators believed this environment might have offered Xavier logistical and material assistance. As a result, all former members of the Church of Philadelphia were interrogated, and the police monitored the sect's followers, hoping to catch any slip-ups in conversation or email. Despite these efforts, no definitive leads emerged. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records allowed authorities to trace his movements within the country. The last concrete trace of Xavier was a security recording from April 15th. Investigators speculated that he was carrying the weapon in his bag based on its shape. While everything suggested he might have committed suicide in the woods, the detectives were puzzled as exhaustive searches in the dense forest yielded no body or remains. This led to the theory that Xavier might have been picked up by a boat and taken to another country. Consequently, an international arrest warrant was issued. On May 4th, Nantes police contacted the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to verify if Emmanuel or Xavier owned a motorboat or sailboat. They found nothing, although they knew the records might not be fully up to date. On May 9th, Emmanuel was summoned to the Nantes police station for another interview, which was, in fact, an interrogation. The police were now focused on finding a boat and identifying its captain. At this point, Emmanuel was unaware of the depth of the investigation or the suspicion surrounding him. When questioned about a reference to a sailboat, Emmanuel explained it as a coincidence. He revealed that he had given Xavier power of attorney to access his safe deposit box. Should anything happen to Emmanuel, the key was stored on a model sailboat in an apartment. The safe contained his will, and that was all. The police let Emmanuel go, feeling frustrated and empty-handed. Despite the coincidences, the investigation remained uncertain. At this stage, Emmanuel was seen merely as a witness. No arrests had been made, and the police debated the point of further interrogating him, though they decided to apply some pressure as he remained the most credible accomplice. A significant detail emerged when investigators reviewed all checks issued to Xavier's company. They found an unusual check for $4,200 signed by Emmanuel. The address on the check indicated a previously unknown account in Monaco. An immediate request for the account statements was sent, but Monaco's strict banking privacy laws meant the authorities there would only respond to their own regulatory agencies. On September 28th, 4 police officers visited Emmanuel's residence again. After long minutes, Emmanuel emerged, disoriented and in his underwear, barely able to confirm his identity. The sparse interior of his apartment was littered with empty alcohol bottles, reflecting a state of deep loneliness. Emmanuel had not received any letters or phone calls from his friend, and that was what tormented him. The police no longer saw him as a suspect, but as a castaway, leading them to question if they were following the wrong lead. Xavier had become one of France's most wanted alleged murderers, possibly even globally. In 2015, a journalist claimed to have received a letter from Xavier stating he was alive. Handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses were conducted, but the note did not yield any new information. On January 9, 2018, police raided a monastery in Roquebrune-sur-Argent after a tip-off about a monk resembling Xavier. After 2 hours of intense searching, they determined it was a case of mistaken identity. On January 18, 2019, Emmanuel died of a heart attack. That same year, authorities arrested a man they believed to be Xavier at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. Once again, it was a case of mistaken identity. Another theory suggested Xavier might be in South America, specifically Argentina, where his language skills and charisma could help him blend in. Years have passed, and the Church of Philadelphia has not only persisted, but has reportedly experienced a resurgence. This small, highly secretive group includes members who have been part of it for nearly 40 years, living as if withdrawn from the world. In the summer of 2019, 2 brothers raised within the sect filed new complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For 2 decades, these women have fervently preached that Xavier is alive, innocent, and hiding in the United States as part of a witness protection program. They claim everything written in the April 9th letter is pure fabrication. This might sound like denial, but it could also be a way to obscure certain truths. Since 2011, the case has been mired in speculation and false leads, sending authorities down endless labyrinths. The pressing question remains: will justice ever be served for Agnes and her children? Despite the bleak outlook, some believe that the truth will eventually come to light.